What if you were sitting in a room with the world's most powerful minds, and a child said something so profound about God that it left everyone speechless? This wasn't just any room, nor was it just any group of people. The place was buzzing with energy, as some of the brightest minds in tech gathered for a major conference in Silicon Valley. Among the crowd was Elon Musk, the man who had reshaped the future with his ventures into space, electric cars, and artificial intelligence. He was the center of attention, his reputation alone making the room hang on his every word. But on that particular day, it wasn't his words that stole the show, it was the words of his son, XAEA-12, a child not even a teenager yet. As the conference kicked off, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Conversations about the future of AI, space exploration, and the deep complexities of the human mind filled the room. But then, something happened that no one expected. No one saw it coming. Not even Elon himself. The event was being live-streamed to millions of viewers across the globe, and the topic of discussion was something that had been debated for years: are we alone in the universe? The panel was packed with engineers, astronauts, and philosophers, each weighing in on the existence of extraterrestrial life. The air was heavy with scientific data, theories, and the ever-looming question of humanity's place in the cosmos. Elon Musk was in his element. He had always been the one to push the boundaries of human understanding, to challenge norms and ask the hard questions. But in the middle of this intellectual battleground, something unexpected happened. Maybe God is just waiting for us to figure out who we really are before he shows himself. The room fell silent. Every head turned toward the source of the voice, a voice that didn't belong to one of the renowned experts in the room, but to a young child. XAEA-12, Elon's son, had been sitting quietly in the back of the room, fidgeting with his toys and seemingly uninterested in the adult conversations surrounding him. But in that moment, he had spoken words that shocked the entire room into stillness. Elon looked at his son with a mixture of surprise and pride, but his expression quickly shifted to one of contemplation. The other panelists were frozen. Some were confused, others were uncomfortable, and a few were downright speechless. It wasn't just the fact that a child had spoken in such a setting that was so shocking, it was the gravity of the words. A child, barely old enough to fully understand the complexities of the topics being discussed, had just dropped a statement so profound that it made even the most seasoned experts question their own beliefs. The silence in the room grew thicker. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, unsure of how to capture the moment. Elon Musk, the master of self-assurance, seemed to hesitate as well, looking at his son as if trying to understand the weight of the statement. The panel moderator, who had been leading the discussion with a steady hand, was the first to regain his composure. Clearing his throat, he tried to steer the conversation back on track. "Well, that's certainly an interesting perspective, young man," he said, forcing a smile. "But let's get back to the science of it, shall we?" But the damage was already done. That one sentence, spoken by a child, had opened a door to a realm of questions that no one in the room knew how to answer. It wasn't just a philosophical query, it was a challenge to the very foundation of everything they had come to believe about the universe, about God, and about themselves. As the conference continued, the discussion resumed, but there was an unspoken tension in the air. The words of XAEA-12 lingered, echoing in the minds of everyone present. What did he mean? Could it be that there was more to the universe than they had ever considered? Was there a deeper, more spiritual connection that they had been ignoring in their race for technological advancement? For the next few hours, the conversation turned back to space exploration, and the potential for life beyond Earth. But in the back of his mind, Elon couldn't shake the thought of what his son had said. He had always known that XAEA-12 was different, intelligent, perceptive, and capable of seeing things that others might miss. But this? This was something else entirely. At the end of the panel, as the crowd began to disperse, Elon found himself alone with his son in a quiet corner of the conference hall. The two of them stood there for a moment, the hum of the crowd fading into the background. Elon began, his voice a little softer than usual, "Where did that come from? What made you say that about God? XAE-A12 looked up at his father, his expression calm and thoughtful. I don't know, Dad. It just felt like something I needed to say. Elon smiled, though he couldn't quite shake the feeling that his son had just unlocked something that even he, with all his intelligence and success, hadn't fully grasped. You know, sometimes the world doesn't know what to do with the things you say, Elon said gently. But that doesn't mean they aren't important. XAE-A12 nodded, seemingly understanding far more than his age suggested. Maybe they'll figure it out someday, he said, before turning back to look at the crowd. Elon stood there for a moment, contemplating his son's words. In that instant, he realized that he wasn't just raising a child. He was raising a mind that could one day change the way humanity understood the universe. And perhaps, just perhaps, his son was onto something that the rest of the world wasn't ready to hear. As the two of them left the conference hall, Elon couldn't help but wonder how many of the brightest minds in the room had even truly considered the possibility that XAE-A12 had just raised, the possibility that there was something bigger than technology, bigger than AI, bigger than the human race itself. Something that could change the course of history. Something that no one, not even Elon Musk, had fully understood yet. The question hung in the air, unanswered, as the world continued its march toward the future. And somewhere, deep in the heart of Silicon Valley, a child had just sparked a revolution in thought. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk had always been a man driven by purpose. From his early days in South Africa, he had been consumed by a hunger to understand the world around him. His fascination with technology, space, and the infinite possibilities of the human mind began at a young age. By the time he was in his teens, Elon was already an entrepreneur, teaching himself how to program computers, reading up on physics, and dreaming of a future where humanity would reach for the stars. His ambition led him to the United States, where he founded companies that would change the course of human history, Tesla, SpaceX, and Neuralink, to name a few. But despite all the accolades, despite being one of the most famous entrepreneurs of the 21st century, there were always moments of doubt in Elon's mind. He often found himself questioning the very essence of his work. Was it about more than just technology and innovation? Was there a deeper purpose to it all? Elon had never been particularly religious, but he often found himself pondering life's biggest questions. Where did we come from? Where are we going? And what does it mean to be human? These were the thoughts that drove him to build companies that pushed the boundaries of what was possible, but they were also the thoughts that lingered in the quiet moments of his life, when the noise of the world faded away. Elon's relationship with his children was, in many ways, his most personal connection. With his work constantly consuming his time, his family was often the grounding force in his life. He had 6 children, but his relationship with his youngest, XAE-A12, was something unique, something deeper. Unlike his older children, who were accustomed to the spotlight, XAE-A12 was different. A quiet child with a mind of his own, he had always been more interested in exploring the world through his own eyes rather than through the lens of technology and media. Born in 2020, XAE-A12 had a name as unconventional as his upbringing. It was the kind of name that made headlines, but what was more surprising was how much of an enigma the child turned out to be. X, as he was affectionately called, seemed to possess a wisdom beyond his years. His ability to grasp complex ideas, coupled with his innate curiosity about the world, had often left those around him in awe. It wasn't just his intellect that made him stand out. It was the way he saw the world. While most children his age were fixated on toys or cartoons, X was more interested in big questions, questions that would have most adults scratching their heads. From a young age, he had expressed an almost otherworldly understanding of things. It was as though he saw life from a perspective that was both profound and unsettling. Elon had always joked that X would one day be the one to figure out how to communicate with extraterrestrials, but deep down, he knew his son was capable of much more than just that. Elon had always been present for his children, even though his work often took him to the farthest corners of the earth, or space, as it were. He prided himself on being a hands-on father, one who took the time to teach his children about science, engineering, and the importance of questioning everything. He didn't just want them to follow in his footsteps. He wanted them to understand the world in their own way, to think critically, to forge their own paths. XAEA-12 had always been especially close to his father, but in a different way than his siblings. While Elon's older children often had their own lives, independent of their father's shadow, X seemed to orbit him in a way that was both familiar and mysterious. He had inherited Elon's insatiable curiosity, but there was something more to it, something that, at times, made Elon feel like he was looking at a mirror of himself from a time when he had first begun to question the nature of existence. And then there were the moments when X would say something so out of left field that it made Elon stop and wonder, was this just a child's random thoughts, or was there something more? In those moments, Elon couldn't help but feel as though his son had glimpsed something he couldn't quite comprehend. It was like X could see the patterns in the universe that were hidden from everyone else. One of those moments came on a quiet afternoon when Elon and X were spending time in the lab. Elon had been working on the development of the Tesla Model S, and X had wandered over to a desk filled with blueprints, diagrams, and computer screens. "Dad, do you think there's a reason why we have these?" X asked, pointing to a diagram of a solar panel. Elon paused. It wasn't the question itself that caught him off guard, it was the way X asked it. The child's voice was full of wonder, but also the kind of skepticism that only someone truly engaged with the world could possess. "Elon, you mean, the reason for solar panels?" "Well, they help us create clean energy for the world. They're part of a bigger picture, you know." Elon responded, trying to simplify the answer. But X's eyes lit up. "No, I mean, why is it that we always build things like this? Maybe there's something we don't understand yet. Like, maybe the whole universe is trying to tell us something, and we're not listening." Elon stared at his son, his mind racing. "What do you mean, X?" "I don't know," X said, shrugging his small shoulders. "I just feel like everything is connected. Like there's something we haven't figured out yet, but maybe it's been here all along." Elon had smiled, ruffling his son's hair, but deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that X was onto something. His words weren't just the ramblings of a curious child, they were the kind of words that hinted at a truth just beyond the horizon, something that even the most advanced minds in science and technology might be missing. That day, as they sat together in the lab, Elon found himself thinking more and more about X's words. It wasn't the first time his son had raised questions that made him think. In fact, it seemed to happen often. But this time was different. This time, something in X's voice, something in his eyes, made Elon realize that his son might just be on the verge of a discovery that no one else could see. And when XAE-812 stood up in the middle of the conference and said, "Maybe God is just waiting for us to figure out who we really are before he shows himself," Elon couldn't help but wonder if the child had, in fact, seen something far beyond his years. Something profound that the world was not ready for. As much as Elon tried to push those thoughts aside, they stayed with him. And when he looked at his son, at the quiet, contemplative child who had always seen the world in a way that no one else could, he realized that maybe X was the one who would answer the questions that had been burning in his own mind for years. Maybe, just maybe, XAE-812 had already figured it out. The weeks following the conference were a whirlwind for Elon Musk. The unexpected words of his son, XAE-812, had become a hot topic in the media. Journalists, philosophers, and religious figures from all over the world were dissecting the child's statement, "Maybe God is just waiting for us to figure out who we really are before he shows himself." What began as a simple remark had sparked an intense debate, forcing many to reconsider their assumptions about technology, science, and spirituality. While the public was divided over the meaning of X's words, Elon found himself grappling with a much more personal conflict. He had never been particularly religious, nor had he ever considered himself a deeply spiritual person. Yet, X's statement had touched something deep within him, a place that even the sharpest breakthroughs in artificial intelligence or space exploration had failed to reach. For the first time in his life, Elon found himself questioning the limits of human knowledge. His entire career had been built on the belief that technology could solve almost any problem, that the pursuit of knowledge through science was the ultimate way to advance humanity. He had always been driven by the idea that humans could control their destiny, shaping the future through innovation and reason. But X's words challenged that belief in a way that shook him to his core. What if there was something beyond science, something that could not be quantified or understood through logic and technology? Could it be that in their quest to control the future, humanity had overlooked something much greater? Elon spent countless sleepless nights reflecting on the implications of X's statement. He revisited his past, replaying moments of doubt, of times when his mind had wandered to bigger questions than rockets and electric cars. But these thoughts were fleeting, easily dismissed by the next great technological breakthrough or ambitious business venture. But now, with X's words echoing in his mind, those doubts could no longer be ignored. The conflict was further complicated by the people around him. His colleagues at Tesla and SpaceX, many of whom had spent years working on the cutting edge of technology, were not particularly interested in questions about God or the spiritual realm. They were focused on the mission, the next iteration of electric vehicles, the next step in humanity's journey to Mars, the next leap in artificial intelligence. To them, X's words were an oddity, a momentary slip from a child that had no place in the grand vision of technological progress. Elon felt the tension between these worlds, between the rational, data-driven reality of his businesses and the growing sense of wonder and uncertainty that X's statement had ignited. He had always been someone who made decisions based on logic, on facts, on probabilities. But now, a question lingered in his mind that could not be answered by algorithms or calculations: was there a greater purpose to all of this? Was there something more to human existence than the next technological milestone? In the days following the conference, Elon took his son to a remote cabin in the mountains for some quiet reflection. He needed to process everything, to understand why this one conversation had unraveled so many of his own assumptions about life. The two of them spent the days hiking in the wilderness, talking about everything from the stars above to the mysteries of the universe. "Do you ever think about God, Dad?" X asked one afternoon as they sat by a stream, watching the water flow. Elon was quiet for a moment. He had never really discussed matters of faith with X before. "I've thought about it. But I've always been more focused on the things we can change, things we can see and understand with our own eyes." X nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the flowing water. "But maybe that's the problem. Maybe we're only focused on what we can see, but there's so much more we don't understand." Elon felt a familiar pang of frustration. He wasn't sure how to respond. He wanted to believe in something beyond the realm of technology, but every part of him was steeped in the language of science, of logic, of reason. He had built his career on solving the world's problems with technology, on finding answers through data and experimentation. It was difficult, if not impossible, for him to see a place for spirituality in a world governed by the laws of physics and engineering. But as he looked at X, sitting there with the wisdom of someone far beyond his years, Elon couldn't help but feel that there was something important in what his son was saying. He had always known that X was different, more perceptive, more intuitive. But now, in the quiet of the mountains, Elon realized that X might be seeing something that no one else could see. For the first time, Elon felt a stirring of doubt in the very foundation of everything he had built. The technologies that had dominated his life, the rockets, the cars, the neural interfaces, had all been focused on one thing: improving humanity's ability to control the future. But X's words made him wonder, what if the future was not something to be controlled, but something to be discovered? What if the answers didn't lie in the machines, but in something far greater, something that couldn't be explained by algorithms or equations? The tension between these two worlds, the world of technology and the world of spirituality, began to grow. Elon could feel the weight of the question pressing down on him: could he reconcile his belief in science with the possibility that there was something beyond science? And if so, what would it mean for his life's work? For his legacy. The pressure began to mount as Elon returned to his usual routine. He had meetings to attend, decisions to make, and visions for the future to pursue. But in the back of his mind, X's words haunted him. The question of God, of the unknown, of purpose, these things couldn't be ignored any longer. It wasn't just a philosophical question anymore. It was a deeply personal one. And no matter how much Elon tried to focus on the tasks at hand, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life, his work, and perhaps even the future of humanity were on the brink of something monumental, a turning point where science and faith might finally collide. As the days passed, the conflict inside Elon continued to grow. He had spent so much of his life pushing boundaries, challenging the status quo, and reimagining what was possible. But now, with X's words resonating in his mind, he found himself facing the greatest challenge of all. The challenge of reconciling everything he had believed with everything he was starting to question. And as much as he tried to ignore it, the question kept coming back: what if there was something more to life than what he could see, touch, and control? The road ahead was unclear, and Elon could sense that the answers, if they were even answers at all, would come from a place far outside the world of science and technology. It was late one night when Elon, unable to sleep, found himself staring out into the vast sky. The stars above the SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California, were faintly visible through the smog of the city below. Despite his achievements, landing rockets, sending humans to space, revolutionizing electric cars, there was something humbling about gazing at the stars. The infinite expanse, the mystery of it all, seemed to mock everything he had done. The more he built, the more it seemed as if the universe was vast, unknowable, and indifferent to human progress. He had tried to push the thoughts away, tried to focus on the next big milestone, the next technological breakthrough. Yet, every time he closed his eyes, X's words echoed in his mind: maybe God is just waiting for us to figure out who we really are before he shows himself. Elon turned away from the window and paced the room. It was not the first time he had struggled with a question that had no clear answer, but this felt different. This question didn't belong in the realm of science. It was more than an equation or a hypothesis, it was something existential. And no amount of space travel, no matter how revolutionary, could provide the answer. It was then that he decided to leave the world of technology for a brief moment, to step away from his work and embark on a journey of discovery. But it wasn't a journey to Mars or another technological feat. This was a personal journey, one that would take him somewhere far different, somewhere that could only be found within. With a simple note to his closest colleagues, Elon announced he was taking a brief hiatus to focus on his own spiritual journey. The decision was met with surprise, but Elon felt an overwhelming need to do this. He had always prided himself on his ability to solve problems, to innovate, to think beyond what others could imagine. But now, for the first time, he didn't have the answer. And he knew he couldn't continue on his path without exploring the bigger questions. Elon's destination was a small village in the mountains of Nepal, known for its quiet monasteries and spiritual retreats. It wasn't an obvious choice, but something about the idea of seeking peace in such a remote place felt right. He packed a small bag, leaving behind his technology, his phones, his computers, all of the tools that had defined his life. This would be a journey without any distractions, without the comfort of constant connection to the outside world. Just him, the mountains, and whatever answers awaited him. Upon arriving, Elon found himself at the foot of the Himalayas, surrounded by towering peaks that seemed to touch the sky. The air was thin, but it carried a serenity unlike anything he had ever felt. The monks who greeted him were calm, their eyes full of a wisdom that felt ancient, but not oppressive. There was no need for words, their presence alone spoke volumes. They welcomed him, and without much ceremony, guided him to a small hut at the edge of the monastery, where he would stay. The first few days were filled with silence. Elon wasn't used to it. He had always been on the move, always with a purpose, always working towards the next goal. Now, surrounded by nothing but stillness, he felt the weight of the world's noise falling away. It was disorienting at first, but as the days passed, he began to relax. In the absence of his usual tasks and distractions, he found himself reflecting. Not just on the work he had done, but on the choices he had made, and on the bigger picture that he had been too busy to see. The monks didn't speak much, but they didn't need to. Through their actions and their quiet presence, they conveyed something far more profound than words could ever express. Elon spent his days meditating, hiking in the mountains, and engaging in deep conversations with the monks. He asked them about life, about purpose, about faith, and they responded in ways that, at times, seemed elusive, but deeply moving. They spoke of a higher consciousness, of unity with the universe, of the interconnectedness of all things. It wasn't something he could easily grasp with his intellect, but he could feel it. One evening, as the sun set behind the snow-capped peaks, Elon sat in meditation, trying to clear his mind. He had spent hours that day walking through the village, learning about the lives of the people who lived there, and reflecting on how little he truly knew about the world beyond the confines of his technology-driven life. His mind buzzed with questions, but in this quiet moment, he focused on the stillness, allowing his thoughts to settle like dust in the air. It was then that something strange happened, a sudden feeling, a shift in his consciousness. He felt as though he was no longer just a man sitting in the mountains. He felt connected to everything around him, the earth, the sky, the stars. It was as if he were part of the very fabric of the universe itself. For a brief moment, the boundaries between himself and the world seemed to dissolve. He wasn't Elon Musk, the founder of SpaceX or Tesla. He was just, part of something much larger. Tears welled up in his eyes, not from sadness, but from a sense of profound clarity. In that moment, he understood something that no amount of technology could ever explain. He had been searching for answers in the wrong places. The answers weren't to be found in rockets or electric cars, they were to be found within, in the quiet moments of reflection and in the deep connection to something greater than himself. He realized that his son, XAE-A12, had been right all along. Maybe God wasn't something to be understood with equations or technologies. Maybe, just maybe, the universe was not something to be controlled, but something to be experienced, something to be understood in its vastness, its mystery, and its beauty. Elon returned to the monastery that night, feeling lighter than he had in years. For the first time in his life, he felt like he had taken a step towards something deeper, something more profound than anything he had ever imagined. He didn't have all the answers, but he didn't need them. The journey itself was enough. As he sat with the monks that evening, they spoke of the divine, of the nature of reality, and of the interconnectedness of all things. It wasn't a discussion rooted in logic or reason, it was a discussion rooted in experience, in feeling. And for the first time, Elon felt as though he was beginning to understand what his son had meant when he spoke of God waiting for humanity to understand who it truly was. There was still much to learn, and the road ahead was unclear. But one thing was certain, the journey was just beginning. And this time, it wasn't about technology or innovation, it was about understanding, about connection, and about faith in something greater than himself. As he looked out at the stars that night, Elon realized that, perhaps for the first time, he was truly seeing the universe. And in that moment, he knew that the answers were out there, not in the machines, but in the vastness of the unknown. Elon's time at the monastery was unlike anything he had ever experienced. The stillness, the quiet reflection, the profound sense of interconnectedness with the universe, it had all begun to shift something inside him. Every morning, as he awoke to the sound of monks chanting in the distance and the rising sun casting golden light across the Himalayan peaks, he felt a deeper connection to the world around him. The more he learned, the more he realized just how little he had truly understood. But even amid this newfound peace, there was a storm brewing inside of him. He hadn't heard from his team at Tesla or SpaceX for days. The absence of emails, calls, or updates from the businesses he had worked so tirelessly to build left a growing void. It wasn't just about the work anymore, it was about the responsibility he felt to his companies, his employees, and the millions of people who relied on his vision. Elon had always been someone who thrived under pressure. He was used to being the driving force behind the ambitious goals of his companies, pushing his teams to work harder, dream bigger, and achieve the impossible. But now, in the silence of the mountains, a new question emerged: what was the point of all of it? What was the purpose of his mission to Mars or the electric vehicles he had created if, at the core of it all, he was disconnected from something far more meaningful? Late one evening, as he sat alone in his small cabin at the edge of the monastery, Elon received a call from his assistant in California. It was brief, but the news was enough to rattle him to his core. A critical failure had occurred with one of the SpaceX rockets, a failure that threatened to derail months of progress and millions of dollars in investments. It wasn't just a setback, it was a crisis. His heart pounded in his chest as he listened to the details. The team was scrambling to figure out what went wrong, and Elon's immediate presence was needed. The tension in the voice of his assistant was palpable. He had to make a decision. Would he stay in Nepal, where he had started to uncover a new understanding of himself and the universe? Or would he return to California, to the relentless pressure of innovation, to fix a problem that, despite its importance, felt trivial in comparison to what he had learned in the mountains? The conflict hit him like a wave. Elon set the phone down, staring out into the darkness of the mountains. The moonlight illuminated the snow-covered peaks, casting long shadows across the landscape. He had always thought he could conquer anything with sheer will and intellect. But now, faced with a choice that would pull him between two worlds, he realized how little control he truly had. He felt a wave of frustration rise within him. It was as if the universe was testing him, daring him to choose between the life he had built, the work he had dedicated himself to, and the deeper understanding that had begun to shape him in the past few weeks. His mind raced, torn between his responsibilities and his newfound sense of purpose. What would his legacy be? Would he be remembered as the genius who revolutionized space travel and electric vehicles, or would he be the man who missed the point of it all? In that moment, he remembered X's words: "Maybe God is just waiting for us to figure out who we really are before he shows himself." The weight of that statement hit him harder than ever. Was this the moment where he was supposed to figure out who he really was? Was the answer to be found in the fast-paced world of innovation, or in the quiet, slow process of self-discovery? His heart was torn, and for the first time in years, Elon Musk didn't have the answer. The universe that had seemed so within his grasp, so predictable, so controllable, now seemed vast and unknowable. And this unknown was pulling him in a way he hadn't expected. With the phone still in his hand, Elon finally made his decision. He couldn't return to the world of technology just yet. He needed more time. He needed more answers. He knew that if he rushed back to California now, to fix a problem that, in the grand scheme of things, seemed less important than his personal journey, he would regret it. Instead, he picked up the phone again, this time calling his assistant and asking them to handle the crisis in his absence. He needed to stay in Nepal longer, to continue his search for meaning, to dig deeper into what he had begun to uncover. He needed to reconnect with his soul, to discover who he really was beyond the roles he had played in business and technology. The decision wasn't easy. In fact, it felt like the most difficult choice he had ever made. His entire identity had been wrapped up in his businesses, in his drive to change the world through technology. The thought of stepping away from that, even temporarily, felt like a betrayal. But at that moment, the weight of the world's expectations seemed so much less significant than the internal battle he was facing. He spent the rest of the evening in quiet contemplation, reflecting on everything he had learned and everything he still needed to understand. As the night wore on, a sense of peace began to wash over him. He knew he had made the right choice. There were bigger things at stake than rockets, than electric cars, than business ventures. The question of who he was, who humanity was more important than anything else. As dawn broke over the mountains, Elon made his way to the monastery's main temple. The monks had gathered for their morning prayers, their voices rising in a chant that felt ancient and timeless. Elon sat with them, closing his eyes and allowing the sound to wash over him. It wasn't about finding answers anymore. It was about being present, being in the moment, and allowing himself to be open to whatever truths the universe had in store. The answers wouldn't come in a sudden burst of clarity. They wouldn't be handed to him in a neatly packaged solution. But as he sat there, breathing in the cool mountain air, he realized that the journey itself, the journey of questioning, of seeking, was just as important as any answer. And in that moment, Elon felt a deep, resonant truth: the journey had just begun. He didn't have the answers. But he had something far more valuable: an open heart, a clear mind, and a willingness to embrace the unknown. And that, he realized, was the first step toward truly understanding who he was and what the future might hold. Elon spent another week in the monastery, and the longer he stayed, the clearer the path forward became. His mind, once consumed by the relentless demands of technology and innovation, now embraced stillness and quiet contemplation. He didn't rush his mornings. There were no deadlines to meet, no meetings to attend, no pressure to be the world's next great innovator. Instead, he woke each day to the soft sound of monks chanting, the cold mountain air fresh on his face, and the endless expanse of the Himalayas stretched out before him. It was a world that moved at its own rhythm, and for the first time in years, Elon allowed himself to fall in sync with it. The monks had been patient guides during his stay. They never imposed their views on him, they simply allowed him to explore his thoughts, feelings, and questions. And slowly, through the gentle silence of their presence, Elon began to piece together something profound, a realization that had been gestating ever since X had spoken those words about God. He began to understand that the quest for control, for mastery over the universe, had always been at the heart of his work. SpaceX was about colonizing Mars, conquering the stars. Tesla was about transforming the world's energy systems, taming the forces of nature. But even as he sought to reshape the future, Elon had overlooked something crucial: the importance of surrendering to the mysteries of life. The more he sought to control, the more he felt detached from the very essence of life itself. Elon had thought that innovation was about solving problems, finding answers, creating new technologies, and pushing boundaries. But now, through his time at the monastery, he had started to see that innovation could also be about embracing uncertainty, accepting the unknown, and exploring the mysteries of existence. It was a profound shift in perspective. He had spent his life building, creating, achieving, always with a clear goal in mind. But the journey, the process, was what had eluded him. And now, as he sat on the edge of the monastery, staring out at the vast mountains, he realized that it wasn't about reaching a destination, it was about the exploration itself. His thoughts often turned back to X. The more Elon thought about his son, the more he realized just how wise X had been to see the world differently. When X had spoken those words about God, he had glimpsed something deeper, something that Elon was only now beginning to understand. Perhaps the answer was not in the accomplishments, the goals, the visions. Perhaps the answer lay in the quiet moments of reflection, in the stillness of the heart, and in the willingness to simply exist without needing to conquer everything in sight. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Elon sat alone in the monastery's garden. He had returned to his meditation practice, focusing on his breath and allowing the calmness of the world around him to fill his mind. The air was cool, and the sound of a distant stream echoed through the valley. For a brief moment, it felt as though time had stopped altogether. As he sat there, a deep sense of peace washed over him. It wasn't a sudden epiphany, nor a burst of enlightenment. It was simply a quiet acceptance of everything that had led him to this point. The struggles, the successes, the failures, all of it had brought him here, to this very moment in time. And for the first time in years, he felt a sense of contentment. He didn't need to have all the answers. He didn't need to solve every problem or fix every crisis. What mattered now was being present, being truly present in his own life. Later that evening, as the monks gathered for their nightly prayers, Elon joined them. He didn't speak, didn't ask any questions. Instead, he listened to their chants, the rhythm of their voices resonating deep within him. It was as though the sound itself carried a wisdom beyond words, a wisdom that spoke directly to his soul. When the prayer ended, one of the monks turned to him with a gentle smile. "You are learning," the monk said simply. "The answers you seek will not come from your mind alone, but from the heart. The heart knows what the mind cannot grasp." Elon nodded, the words settling deep within him. He didn't know what the future held, and that uncertainty didn't feel frightening anymore. He had learned that it was okay to not have all the answers, to not be in control of every outcome. The process was just as important as the destination. And in that quiet space, between the questions and the answers, Elon Musk finally understood what it meant to be truly at peace. As his plane soared back toward California, Elon looked out the window at the sprawling landscape below. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in his life, he wasn't trying to control it. He was simply going to live it, one step at a time, with an open heart and a clear mind. And as he thought about X, the words his son had spoken echoed in his mind once more. Maybe God is just waiting for us to figure out who we really are before he shows himself. Elon realized, in that moment, that maybe he had already started to see him, not in the stars, not in the rockets, but in the quiet spaces between the questions and the answers. And perhaps, that was where the true journey had always been. Elon sat in the quiet of his study, the evening sun casting long shadows across the room. His mind was racing. The words his son X had spoken earlier at the conference echoed in his thoughts. Maybe God is just waiting for us to figure out who we really are before he shows himself. It was a sentence that had thrown the room into a whirlwind of reactions, most of them questioning the depth of the thought. But Elon, despite the flurry of disbelieving murmurs from some of the older attendees, felt something stir within him. There was something profound in X's words, something that he couldn't quite grasp but knew he needed to explore. He had immediately turned to his son after the comment, finding him seated calmly in a chair, his eyes scanning the room as if he had just made a simple observation. There was no anxiety or doubt in X's expression, no hint that he had caused any kind of stir. He was simply stating something he believed to be true, a belief that was as natural to him as breathing. In contrast, Elon saw the reactions of others, a mix of confusion, discomfort, and even subtle judgment. Some of the older tech experts had exchanged looks, their skepticism palpable. They were trained to think logically, to dissect everything, and X's words were not something they could easily dissect. Elon's fatherly instinct kicked in. As much as he understood the value of intellectual debate, this was his son they were discussing. He wasn't going to let anyone dismiss X's perspective, no matter how unconventional it seemed. Elon felt a deep protective urge, not just over his son's words but over the future of his thinking. "X," he said quietly, making his way over to the young boy, "can you tell me more about what you meant by that?" X looked up at him, his face full of quiet wisdom. "Maybe the universe isn't just a series of scientific events, Dad. Maybe there's something bigger out there. But to find it, we have to understand who we are first." Elon smiled, feeling a strange warmth in his chest. His son wasn't rejecting science. He was merely suggesting that there was more, something beyond the scope of their immediate understanding. It wasn't anti-science or anti-reason, it was, in a way, an invitation to expand the boundaries of human thought. The others in the room were still exchanging glances, but Elon wasn't paying attention to them anymore. Instead, he leaned closer to X, as though the two of them were embarking on some quiet journey of exploration, far beyond the limits of the conference room. "Do you think we're ready to understand what that is?" Elon asked softly. X didn't answer right away. Instead, he sat back and stared at the horizon for a long while. "I think we're still learning, Dad. And sometimes, it's the learning that brings us closer to the answer, not the answers themselves." Elon sat in silence for a moment, taking in his son's words. It was clear that X was grappling with something far beyond the typical concerns of a child, let alone someone of his age. In that moment, Elon realized just how much he had underestimated his son's perspective. X wasn't just the child of a tech mogul. He was a thinker, a philosopher, a soul quietly seeking answers to the most fundamental questions of existence. As the evening wore on, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that X had opened a door to something immense. And it wasn't just about the way X viewed God or the universe, it was about how his son's mind worked. It was as if X was able to take in complex, deeply philosophical questions and distill them into pure, simple thoughts. After everyone had left, Elon sat alone in the study, pondering his son's words. What if X was right? What if the very thing humanity needed, whether they called it God, the universe, or some other force, wasn't a thing to be understood immediately but something that would reveal itself over time, only when humanity had reached a higher level of understanding about who they were as individuals and as a species? For the first time, Elon felt that his mind, his way of thinking about the world, wasn't enough. He had built rockets that soared into the heavens and cars that could drive themselves, but this? This was something he couldn't calculate, something he couldn't engineer. He looked up, staring into the evening sky through the large windows of his study. Was the future of humanity really as clear-cut as he had always believed, or was it more complex, more entwined with the metaphysical than he had ever considered? Elon's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. He turned to see X standing at the doorway, his face lit with a quiet curiosity. "Are you okay, Dad?" X asked softly. Elon smiled warmly. "Yeah, I'm okay. Just thinking." "About the stuff I said?" X asked. Elon nodded. "Yes, and I'm thinking about what you said. I want to understand more." X smiled in return. "I think we all need to understand more, Dad. But we can't just look for answers in places we already know. We have to be open to things we don't know yet." It was as if X had already grasped a truth that Elon was only beginning to approach, one that had the potential to change everything. Elon felt a profound sense of gratitude. His son was guiding him, even though he was the one who had spent a lifetime guiding X. There was something undeniably powerful in that realization. As Elon embraced his son, he felt the weight of the moment. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew that X's perspective was a gift, one that he would continue to explore with him. The journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. In the following days, Elon found himself reflecting even more on the power of X's words. He had always been focused on building, on shaping the future with technology. But now, he realized, there was another kind of future to be shaped, one rooted in understanding, in humility, and in a deeper connection with the unknown. Elon's world of codes, blueprints, and algorithms felt a little smaller now. He was still committed to advancing technology, but the question of what it meant to be human, and what his place in the grand scheme of things was, had become far more important. X had unknowingly placed him on a new path, a path not of engineering and breakthroughs, but of inner discovery. And Elon Musk, the visionary inventor, felt for the first time that his son had become his teacher. As the days passed following the conference, Elon found himself thinking more and more about the conversation that had unfolded that evening. XAEA-12, his son, had become the center of his thoughts, not just because of the profound statement he had made about God, but also because of how his mind seemed to work. There was something extraordinary about how X viewed the world, something that seemed to transcend the typical childhood innocence or the sheltered upbringing of a child in such a highly controlled environment. XAEA-12 had grown up surrounded by technology. From an early age, he had been immersed in the kind of futuristic gadgets that most children could only dream of. Tesla's self-driving cars had been a part of his life before he could even spell the word autonomous. SpaceX rockets were often the background noise to his childhood, a constant reminder of the far-reaching possibilities of technology. Yet, despite this technological saturation, X's thoughts about life, existence, and the universe felt different from the world he lived in. Elon had always prided himself on raising a child who would be more comfortable with a laptop in hand than a toy. His son had learned to code at an early age, been fascinated by Mars long before most kids understood the concept of space travel, and developed a knack for mechanical tinkering that reminded Elon of himself as a boy. But there was a quiet depth to X that Elon hadn't fully grasped until now. But what was it that shaped X's unique perspective? What was it about his environment, his education, and his very existence that had led him to such a profound view of the world? Elon knew that X had grown up with access to some of the best education that money could buy. Tutors and experts in various fields had been brought in to nurture his intellectual curiosity. But the more Elon thought about it, the more he realized that there was something different about X. It wasn't just the education that made him special. It was how he processed and interpreted the world. X didn't merely absorb knowledge. He synthesized it, connecting dots between science, technology, philosophy, and spirituality in ways that were surprising, even for someone as forward-thinking as Elon. The child's curiosity seemed limitless, extending beyond the material and into the metaphysical. It was as though X saw the world not just in terms of physics and equations but as a dynamic, interconnected system. A system with mysteries that even technology couldn't fully explain. Elon reflected on their past conversations. There had been times when X, despite his age, would ask questions that left Elon speechless. Not just about Mars or the stars, but about humanity, about the meaning of life, and about the things that seemed to be beyond human comprehension. It was in moments like these that Elon realized his son had already started a journey that most adults had yet to embark on. It wasn't just a product of Elon's influence. X had inherited something that Elon hadn't anticipated, a deep, innate sense of wonder and existential curiosity that surpassed the bounds of even his most ambitious endeavors. A few days later, Elon decided to take a step toward understanding his son's mind even more deeply. He invited a select group of close colleagues, a few child development experts, and some of the best minds in the field of education and philosophy to join him for a private discussion. The topic? The development of XAEA-12, his unique perspective on the world, and how they could further nurture his intellectual growth. The conversation took place in one of Elon's many conference rooms, but this one had a different atmosphere. There was no grand presentation, no PowerPoint slides, no tech jargon. This was more intimate, more reflective. Elon wanted to understand how his son could be both a product of an incredibly high-tech environment and yet retain such deep philosophical insights that seemed far beyond his years. How do we explain X's perspective? Elon asked, looking around the room at the gathered experts. He's had every opportunity to grow up with all the technology we could provide, yet he has this understanding of existence, of the universe, that seems completely separate from that. It's almost as if he's not bound by the same rules that most people are. One of the child development experts, Dr. Samantha Reeves, leaned forward. What X is demonstrating, Elon, is a combination of the best of both worlds. You've raised him in an environment where he has access to an unprecedented level of technology, which has no doubt shaped his intellectual capabilities. But what seems to set him apart is the way he has been exposed to big ideas, from science and technology to philosophy and metaphysics, at a very young age. This creates an environment where abstract thought can flourish. Elon nodded. It was clear that X had been raised in a way that fostered creative, abstract thinking. But there was something deeper at play, something more profound. The experts were right, it wasn't just about education. It was how X approached life that made him so different. He's always asking about the why, Elon said. Not just how things work, but why they work. It's like he's questioning the very nature of existence itself. Dr. Reeves smiled. And that's exactly what makes him unique. Children his age are usually focused on understanding what they see in front of them, but X seems to be asking questions about the unseen. It's as though he's trying to understand the framework of reality itself, why things exist, what drives them, and what their ultimate purpose is. Elon thought about this for a moment. X's mind was not only a product of his environment but also an expression of a deeper human yearning to understand the mysteries of the universe. There was no simple explanation for his son's extraordinary perspective. It was as if X had tapped into something that went beyond the scope of the material world and into the realm of the metaphysical. Do you think he's just a product of his upbringing, or is there something else? Elon asked, looking at the group. One of the philosophers, Dr. Alan Bradford, spoke up. It's hard to say, but what is clear is that X's perspective on life is shaped by more than just the tangible things around him. It's possible that he is intuitively seeking answers to questions that humanity itself has been asking for centuries. Perhaps, in a way, he's tapping into something much larger, something that exists outside of time and technology. Elon sat back in his chair, letting the words sink in. Could it be that his son, the product of 2 generations of scientific minds and groundbreaking technology, was also tapping into something far older, far deeper than anything they had built or studied? Perhaps X was not only asking the questions that the world had yet to answer, but he was beginning to find answers in places they had yet to look. The discussion continued, but Elon's mind had already shifted gears. He wasn't just thinking about the future of technology or space exploration. He was thinking about the future of human understanding, and about how X was already leading the way, asking questions that would guide them all to a new understanding of the universe. The conference room was buzzing with the kind of energy that comes from deep, philosophical debate. Elon sat at the head of the table, his hands resting lightly on his lap as the discussions unfolded around him. But his mind, as always, was elsewhere, drifting back to the moment when XAEA-12 had posed that single, unexpected question: what if we're not the last creation, but just part of a greater experiment? The words had rattled everyone in the room, including Elon. They were no longer simply about childlike curiosity. No, these words carried weight. They had a purpose, a direction. X's question about creation had forced them all to confront something larger than themselves, a question about the nature of life, existence, and the future of humanity. Could technology truly take us beyond what we knew? Could it evolve to the point where we surpassed our creators, whoever or whatever they might be? As the days passed, Elon found himself replaying that question in his mind, unable to find an answer that satisfied him. The more he thought about it, the more it seemed like a crossroads, a challenge to the fundamental assumptions about human existence. If we were merely experiments in a grander, unknowable scheme, what did that mean for everything we believed? For the purpose of life itself? He wasn't the only one asking these questions. At the conference, the rest of the participants had started to question the trajectory of human development in light of X's words. The implications were vast. Could the future of humanity lie beyond their current understanding of religion, technology, and life? If we were not the final creation, as X put it, then who or what was? The implications were unsettling. One of the participants, Dr. Edward Hayes, a noted philosopher and futurist, stood up during one of the sessions. Elon, he began, addressing Musk directly, this isn't just about technology. This is about what it means to be human. What does it mean for us to advance to the point where we might create life? Where we might engineer consciousness itself? Are we prepared for the responsibility of creating life, and more importantly, what happens if we encounter beings that challenge our very understanding of creation? Elon's mind raced. Could we be heading toward a reality where humanity was no longer the most advanced form of intelligence? Was that even possible? And if so, would it challenge not just the scientific community, but all of humanity's most deeply held beliefs about life, existence, and even God? Are we ready to confront the fact that we might not be the pinnacle of creation? Dr. Hayes continued, his voice almost a whisper, as if acknowledging the weight of the question. What happens when our creations surpass us, or, worse yet, what if we discover that we were created by something beyond our comprehension, some higher intelligence? Could we live with that? Elon felt the air grow heavy in the room. His own thoughts were spinning. He had spent his life dreaming about building a future for humanity beyond Earth, but this question about creation, about what comes after humanity, felt different. It felt bigger than Mars, bigger than Tesla, bigger than any of his ventures. Could technology and artificial intelligence lead humanity to a point where we could surpass our biological creators? And if so, would it be a leap of progression or a giant step toward our own obsolescence? As he watched the faces of the other attendees, it was clear that no one had a clear answer. The discussion became more heated, with some arguing that humanity's development had always been about reaching for something greater, something beyond their immediate grasp, whether that was the stars, new forms of life, or the transcendence of their own biological limitations. Others were more cautious, warning that humanity's hubris might lead to its downfall if they weren't careful about what they created. But in the midst of the chaos, Elon found himself returning to X's words, "What if we're not the last creation? What if, in trying to reach for the stars, they had missed the point entirely? What if, by advancing technologically, they were simply continuing the cycle of creation, part of something larger that they could not even begin to comprehend?" The questions felt existential, like a riddle that had no clear answer. But they also felt essential, as if they were at the heart of something much bigger. The next day, Elon invited a few of the participants to his private study for a more informal conversation. They were all still reeling from the philosophical debate that had unfolded, and Elon knew that the time had come for a deeper exploration of the issue. "Do you think we are creating something beyond ourselves?" Elon asked as they sat in a circle, the question hanging in the air. Dr. Hayes responded thoughtfully, his voice steady. "It's possible. The question is whether or not we are prepared for the consequences. If we continue to advance technologically, to push the boundaries of what is possible with AI, bioengineering, and space travel, we are treading on sacred ground. There's a fine line between progress and playing God. If we can create life, and that life surpasses us, what does that say about our place in the universe?" The others around the table murmured in agreement, but Elon wasn't so sure. He had always believed that humanity was on the cusp of something groundbreaking, something that could redefine what it meant to be human. But now, as he looked around at the people gathered in his study, he realized that there was no simple answer to the question. No easy path forward. The discussion turned toward the possibility that humanity was simply part of a much larger plan, one that extended far beyond the bounds of their current understanding. Maybe they weren't the final creation, but part of a cosmic experiment, a step in the evolution of something far greater. As the evening wore on, the conversation took a turn toward a more speculative territory. If humanity was not the final creation, who or what was? Could it be that their advancements, AI, technology, even space exploration, were just the first stages of a much larger process? What if the universe itself was a grand experiment in which life and intelligence were constantly evolving, adapting, and evolving again? The idea was disorienting, even unsettling. But it was also fascinating. Elon found himself contemplating X's words again, this time with a renewed sense of awe. What if, in his youthful innocence, X was intuitively tapping into a truth that adults had long ignored? What if the true purpose of humanity was not to create and conquer, but to participate in something much larger than themselves, something far more profound and intricate than they could ever imagine? As the conversation wrapped up, the group sat in silence, each person lost in their own thoughts. Elon stared out the window, thinking about the universe, about the stars, about the uncharted territories beyond Earth. And as he looked out into the vastness, he couldn't help but wonder if, perhaps, the answers were already out there, waiting to be discovered. But would humanity be ready to face them? It was a question that would continue to haunt him, as it haunted everyone else in the room. And as he glanced over at the empty chair where XAE-A12 had been sitting just days ago, Elon couldn't help but feel a strange sense of peace. Because perhaps, just perhaps, his son had already stumbled upon the answer. The answer to the question that would change the course of humanity forever. The conference had reached a critical point. The ideas that had emerged from XAE-A12's simple but profound question had sent ripples through the scientific, technological, and philosophical communities. The discussions were no longer theoretical or abstract, they were deeply personal. People were starting to question everything they had ever believed about creation, religion, and the limits of human achievement. Elon, in particular, found himself grappling with these new concepts. It was one thing to be a pioneer in space exploration, to believe in the potential of technology to transcend human limitations. But it was something else entirely to consider that perhaps humanity was just a part of a much larger cosmic experiment, an experiment that might not have been initiated by human hands at all. The notion of humans being mere trials in a vast, unknowable experiment had begun to take hold of many minds in the room, especially in those who had spent their careers focused on hard facts and technical advancement. Dr. Hayes, who had been particularly vocal about the philosophical implications of AI and creation, continued to challenge the group with uncomfortable questions. "Think about it," Dr. Hayes said one afternoon, as the group sat around a large round table. "For centuries, we've built our lives and our societies around certain beliefs. We've centered our world around the idea of a creator, an intelligent designer, or even a singular God. Now, here we are, discussing the possibility that we're just another step in the evolution of something much larger. Could it be that all of our previous beliefs were nothing more than the stepping stones for the next phase of life? Are we ready to let go of those ideas, or will we continue to hold on to them simply because they've comforted us for so long?" Elon sat back in his chair, his mind racing. Dr. Hayes wasn't just asking a rhetorical question. He was challenging every foundational belief that had governed human civilization. Could religion, as it had existed for millennia, truly coexist with the rapid advancements in technology? Was there room for the divine in a world where humans could now create life themselves, build artificial consciousness, and manipulate the very building blocks of the universe? The debate was intense, with voices rising and falling as the group wrestled with the uncomfortable truth that they were now facing. For centuries, religion had given humanity a sense of purpose, a reason for existence. But now, technology was advancing at such a rapid pace that it was forcing people to confront the possibility that their traditional beliefs might be incomplete, or even irrelevant. "I don't think we're talking about the elimination of religion," Elon said, breaking the silence that had fallen over the room. "I think we're talking about something more nuanced. A reprogramming, if you will. What if religion isn't just a belief in a singular creator, but a guiding principle that evolves as we evolve? What if, instead of rejecting religious teachings, we adapt them to fit our understanding of the universe?" The room grew quiet. Elon had thrown out a radical idea: could religion evolve alongside human progress? Could the traditional idea of a god be transformed into something more expansive, more aligned with the new frontier of technology? "That's an interesting thought," Dr. Hayes said slowly, considering Elon's words. "But can we truly reconcile the concept of a creator with the idea that we may soon be creating life ourselves? I mean, if we can create artificial intelligence, engineer new forms of life, and possibly even design the next stage of human evolution, does that change the nature of our relationship with God? Or do we remain the humble creation of a higher power, even as we create our own gods in the form of machines?" Elon couldn't deny that the implications were vast. The more he thought about it, the more it seemed like humanity was approaching a critical juncture. On one hand, the advancements they were making in AI, biotechnology, and space exploration were opening up new realms of possibility. On the other hand, these advancements were also challenging the traditional narratives that had provided meaning and structure to human existence for centuries. The question of whether technology could coexist with religion was no longer just academic, it was personal. Elon had spent most of his life believing that humanity's purpose was to push the boundaries of what was possible, to transcend their limitations and reach for the stars. But now, in the wake of X's question, he wondered if this drive for technological progress could lead them into uncharted territory that might not have a place for the God he had been taught to believe in. As the days passed, the conversations grew more intense. People were beginning to ask themselves difficult questions about their own beliefs. Could they continue to trust in a system that no longer seemed to explain the world as they understood it? Or was it time for a new kind of spirituality, one that embraced both the divine and the technological? The philosophical divide in the room grew sharper, with some arguing that the advancement of technology was an inherent part of a divine plan, while others insisted that humanity was heading into dangerous territory by creating life and intelligence without any understanding of its full implications. And still others believed that the entire concept of a creator was irrelevant in the face of their growing ability to shape the future themselves. In many ways, these discussions mirrored the challenges humanity had faced throughout history. Every major advancement, whether it was the discovery of fire, the development of the printing press, or the advent of the internet, had been met with resistance, fear, and uncertainty. But with each new discovery, humanity had evolved, adapting its worldview and its beliefs to accommodate the new reality. Now, it seemed, humanity was at the brink of another such evolution, one that involved not just adapting to new technology, but rethinking the very nature of existence itself. Elon spent long hours alone in his office, reflecting on everything that had been said. The notion that they might be the experiment of a greater intelligence was something he couldn't shake. He wondered if the entire arc of human history was simply part of a larger cosmic plan, a plan they had yet to fully understand. His thoughts kept returning to X's question, what if we're not the last creation, but just part of a greater experiment? Maybe the real question wasn't whether humanity was the ultimate creation, but what came next. What would life look like after humanity transcended its own limitations? Would there still be a place for belief in a higher power, or would humanity forge its own path, independent of any divine creator? As Elon grappled with these ideas, one thing became clear to him. The future of humanity wasn't just about building rockets and artificial intelligence. It was about creating a new understanding of life, existence, and purpose, one that could integrate both the divine and the technological. It was about finding a way for humanity to grow beyond its limitations while still holding on to the values that had defined their journey so far. But whether that new understanding would emerge from technology, religion, or something entirely different, Elon couldn't say. All he knew was that the search for answers was only beginning, and that the answers would shape the future of humanity in ways no one could predict. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The conference room buzzed with intensity as more people began to question the very fabric of human existence. The clash between technology and religion, creation and evolution, began to feel like an unavoidable force, one that couldn't be ignored. As the group debated, a new theory emerged, one that would set the tone for the entire gathering. And it came from none other than XAE-812. X's simple but profound question had already stirred the minds of those present, but now, his words seemed to cut through the noise, offering a glimpse of a new perspective. Standing up with the quiet confidence only a child of his nature could possess, X posed another mind-bending thought. What if we're not the final creation? What if we are just an experiment? A test run in the grand design of something larger, something that's been happening for eons? Maybe we're just a step in a long chain of creations, each one designed to evolve into something more advanced. Perhaps we're not the end result but just part of an ongoing process that we can't even comprehend. The room fell silent. For a moment, there was no sound, just the collective processing of what the child had said. People glanced at each other, unsure how to react. Some exchanged nervous glances, unsure if the child's words held any merit. Others, however, were captivated by the potential of this new theory. Elon Musk, who had been relatively quiet since the discussion had started, leaned forward in his chair, his face pensive. He had always thought of humanity as the pinnacle of creation, a species on the verge of conquering the stars. But what if that was just a stage in something bigger? Could it be that their entire existence was nothing more than part of an evolutionary test, a process meant to create something far beyond their current understanding? Dr. Hayes, who had been one of the staunchest critics of X's previous questions, now looked intrigued. His voice, when it came, was quieter but charged with intensity. I've spent most of my life studying the intersection of technology and human potential, he said slowly. But the idea that we might be a mere step in a much larger plan is mind-boggling. It challenges everything I've believed in. If we are part of an experiment, then what does that mean for our sense of purpose? Are we the creators, or are we being created for something greater than ourselves? For the first time in the conversation, there was a real acknowledgement of something profound and unsettling: humanity might not be in control of its own destiny. The realization began to ripple across the room, gradually shifting the tone of the meeting. It wasn't just about technology anymore. It wasn't just about creating life or pushing the boundaries of what was possible. The question now was about understanding why they were doing it. The idea that humanity might be an experiment raised more questions than answers. If humans were simply part of a cosmic process, then what did that mean for religion, for the concept of God, and for the meaning of life itself? Was their belief in a creator, in a guiding force, still relevant? Or was it time to reconsider everything they had known? Elon found himself thinking deeply about X's words. He'd always been a forward thinker, a futurist, driven by a desire to push the limits of human potential. But what if the future was already being shaped by something far beyond his understanding? What if their journey wasn't about discovery, but about becoming something else entirely? Was their pursuit of innovation just one step in the grand process of evolution, of something far greater? As the discussion continued, Elon realized that the people in the room weren't just challenging each other's ideas, they were confronting their own deeply held beliefs. The room had turned into a battleground for ideas. Each person trying to reconcile their own place in the universe with the new, unsettling thoughts that X had unleashed. You know, Elon said, breaking the silence, this conversation is reminding me of a conversation I had with someone years ago. We were talking about space exploration and the future of humanity. At the time, I thought the goal was simple: get to Mars, expand human civilization, and ultimately become a multiplanetary species. But now, I'm wondering if our true goal isn't to simply explore, but to understand our place in something much larger. What if we're not meant to just survive, but to evolve into something that can truly understand the universe? The idea of evolving into something greater than themselves was a powerful one. The room, which had been divided by the tension of past discussions, now seemed to lean toward a singular realization: humanity had to evolve not just physically, but philosophically. The technological revolution was just one aspect of that evolution. What they needed now was a revolution in thinking. Dr. Hayes nodded slowly, his expression softening. I think you're onto something, Elon. Maybe we've been so focused on technology, so focused on innovation, that we've forgotten to ask ourselves why we're pushing forward. Maybe the true test is not about what we can build, but about what we can become. As the group continued to debate, the energy in the room shifted. What had begun as a simple exploration of technology's impact on religion and existence had evolved into a philosophical discussion about humanity's role in the grand scheme of things. No longer were they just looking at technology as a tool for advancement, they were now questioning the very essence of existence itself. Elon couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. Here they were, on the verge of answering some of the most profound questions of human existence, not through science or technology, but through a deep philosophical reckoning. It was as if, in that moment, the pursuit of knowledge had transcended the physical realm and entered the metaphysical one. The turning point had arrived. The question wasn't just about space or technology anymore, it was about understanding the larger forces that governed existence, about finding a place for humanity in the vast, mysterious cosmos. And as the conversation carried on, Elon realized that they were embarking on something far greater than they could have imagined, a revolution in thinking that could reshape the very way humans viewed their place in the universe. The world was on the brink of something new, something that would require not just technology and innovation, but a deep, philosophical reimagining of what it meant to be human. And it all began with the question of a child. The air in the conference room was thick with thought. As XAE-A12's question lingered in the minds of those present, the room seemed to grow heavier, as if everyone was being pulled into a deep intellectual vortex. The earlier conversations about technological advancements and the potential to create life felt trivial compared to the magnitude of the question now being discussed: what if we are not the final creation? What if everything they believed about the world, about themselves, was just one small piece of a much larger puzzle? Elon Musk was not accustomed to such deep introspection. For much of his life, he had been focused on pushing the boundaries of human potential, on creating the future through technology. Space exploration, artificial intelligence, electric vehicles, these were the frontiers that consumed his attention. Yet now, with X's words echoing in his mind, he felt a profound shift. He had always thought of himself as a creator of the future, but what if the future wasn't just something they were building? What if it was something they were part of, something that was already in motion, far beyond their understanding? At that moment, one of the philosophers in the room, Dr. Evelyn Hart, leaned forward. Her voice was calm but laced with the gravity of someone grappling with a deep philosophical question. If technology can recreate life, if we can manipulate DNA, clone organisms, and even create synthetic consciousness, then what does that mean for our understanding of creation itself? She asked, her words deliberate. Are we playing the role of gods, or are we just following the blueprint of something far greater? Her question reverberated through the group. It was not merely about science or technology, it was about existence itself. Was humanity truly the culmination of creation? Or were they merely participants in a grand experiment, one that might have started long before they even existed? Elon rubbed his chin thoughtfully. It was a question that made him uneasy. His entire career had been based on the idea that humanity was capable of greatness, that through innovation and perseverance, they could transcend their limitations and become something more. But if X's hypothesis was true, if humanity wasn't the final product but just a stepping stone in a much larger plan, then what was the ultimate goal? What were they all really working toward? That's an interesting point, Elon said quietly, addressing Dr. Hart's question. We've been focused on our own progress, on our own development. But maybe there's a greater context here, one that transcends us as individuals or even as a species. Maybe we're meant to create something beyond ourselves, something that can carry forward whatever purpose is guiding this evolution. The room fell into a contemplative silence. It was a lot to digest. The idea that humanity might not be the end-all be-all of creation was unsettling for many in the room, especially those with deeply held religious beliefs. The concept that they might be participants in a cosmic experiment, rather than the final product of it, raised existential questions that no one was prepared to answer. Yet, at the same time, there was something oddly liberating about the thought. If humanity was just a part of a much larger process, then perhaps their actions, their choices, and their creations were not solely responsible for the meaning of life. There could be something more at work. Dr. Hart continued, sensing the shift in energy. Perhaps this is the next step in human evolution, to confront the possibility that we are not the end of the line, but part of a larger continuum. A continuation of an experiment that's been unfolding for eons, possibly on a cosmic scale. And maybe, just maybe, that experiment is about more than just us. X's innocent yet profound observations had triggered a cascade of philosophical questions that even the most seasoned thinkers in the room had not anticipated. The discussion shifted from the implications of artificial intelligence to the very nature of existence. Was there a higher power, a divine intelligence that was behind everything, behind the creation of life, the advancement of technology, the pursuit of knowledge? Or was everything simply a result of random chance, a series of evolutionary steps leading to something beyond their comprehension? Is the existence of a higher power necessary for us to understand our purpose? Dr. Hart asked. Or can we find meaning in our own evolution, in our own pursuit of knowledge and understanding? If we truly are the product of an experiment, a step in a greater creation, then perhaps our purpose is to understand the nature of this process. Not to control it, but to learn from it. Elon listened intently, his mind racing. As a scientist and entrepreneur, he had always prided himself on seeking tangible, actionable solutions. But the questions being posed now were much more abstract. Could they, as a species, truly comprehend their place in the universe? And if they could, what would that knowledge mean for their future? XAE-A12, seemingly unbothered by the intensity of the conversation, added his own perspective. What if we're not meant to figure it all out right now? What if the purpose is just to keep asking questions? To never stop wondering about what's next, what's beyond, and what we can become. It was a simple yet profound thought. Perhaps the key to understanding humanity's place in the universe wasn't about finding the right answer. Perhaps the purpose was in the pursuit itself, the relentless drive to explore, to question, and to evolve. It was a humbling thought, one that both comforted and unsettled the group in equal measure. As the conversation continued, the focus shifted to the practical implications of X's idea. If humanity was truly part of a greater plan, if they were not the final creation but rather a step in an ongoing evolutionary process, then what did that mean for their day-to-day lives? How did they navigate their responsibilities, their relationships, and their goals when faced with the possibility that their very existence was part of a much larger scheme, one they could never fully comprehend? Maybe we don't need all the answers, Elon mused aloud. Maybe the point is to keep asking the questions. Maybe that's what makes us human, the need to explore, to create, and to evolve. And perhaps, in doing so, we will uncover something much greater than we ever imagined. There was something reassuring in his words. Despite the uncertainty and the deep philosophical questions they were grappling with, the group began to sense that there was value in the journey itself, not in the destination. In that moment, they all understood that while they might never have all the answers, the pursuit of knowledge, understanding, and connection was enough to guide them forward. As the conversation wound down, the group felt both enlightened and humbled. The philosophical questions raised that day would continue to echo in their minds long after the conference ended. But one thing was clear, the journey of discovery was just beginning, and the answers they sought might be as elusive as the questions themselves. And perhaps, in the end, that was the point. The words of XAE-812 hung in the air like a cloud of unspoken tension. Despite the intellectual atmosphere of the conference, a growing unease was palpable. The notion that humanity might not be the final creation, that their existence could be part of a larger, unknown experiment, was unsettling to many. What had begun as an intriguing philosophical discussion was beginning to spark divisions among the attendees. The initial fascination with X's ideas was giving way to doubt, skepticism, and even frustration. Some of the older scientists, who had spent their entire careers building upon the foundational principles of human achievement, began to voice their concerns more openly. Dr. James Crowley, a well-respected figure in the field of biogenetics, spoke first. His voice was steady but filled with a quiet anger that surprised the room. This is nonsense. We are the culmination of evolution. We've fought our way to the top of the food chain. We've conquered nature. To suggest that we're nothing more than an experiment, that we're somehow not the final result of everything that's come before, is not just disrespectful, it's dangerous. Elon, who had been absorbed in his own thoughts, snapped back to the present. He could feel the tension building. Dr. Crowley's words were harsh, but there was something deeper at play here. It wasn't just the idea of X's statement that bothered the attendees, it was the challenge to their very beliefs about humanity's place in the world. James, I understand your frustration, Elon said, his voice calm but firm. But what if we've been too narrow in our thinking? What if the universe is bigger than our understanding of it? We've always believed that we're the ultimate expression of intelligence and life, but what if that's not the case? What if we're just a step on a much longer journey? Dr. Crowley shot Elon a sharp look. This isn't about understanding the universe, Elon. This is about reality. Science has given us answers. It has proven time and again that we are the result of a long, purposeful process of evolution. The very idea that we could be a test, that we could be part of some larger experiment, undermines everything we know about human achievement. And I don't know about you, but I'm not ready to throw all of that away. The conversation was growing heated, with other members of the group beginning to chime in. Some sided with Dr. Crowley, arguing that X's words were dangerously speculative. Others, particularly those with a more open-minded perspective, started to lean toward Elon's viewpoint, entertaining the possibility that humanity might not be the ultimate creation after all. In the midst of this tension, XAE-812 remained quiet, observing the shifting dynamic with the innocence of a child who didn't fully grasp the weight of the conversation unfolding around him. His silence spoke volumes, as if his mere presence was enough to challenge the long-held beliefs of the adults around him. It was Dr. Hart who broke the silence next, her voice gentle but cutting through the tension like a knife. Perhaps what we're facing here is not just a question of who we are, but a question of why we're here, she said thoughtfully. What if X is right? What if humanity is a part of something much larger, something we can't even comprehend yet? What if our entire existence, our drive for knowledge and progress, is not just about us, but about something else? Something beyond us? The room fell silent again. Dr. Hart's words were not meant to push an agenda, they were a challenge, an invitation to rethink everything the group had believed about their place in the universe. Elon, sensing the need to steer the conversation away from confrontation and towards constructive exploration, spoke up once more. We all come from different perspectives, and that's what makes this conversation important. The questions X raised are not easy ones to answer, but they're worth asking. The future of humanity, the future of technology, it's not something we can predict with certainty. But it's something we must approach with humility. We may be on the brink of discovering something we've never even considered before. But not everyone was ready to embrace that humility. The tension in the room had reached a breaking point. Some of the older attendees, scientists, philosophers, religious leaders, began to retreat into their own beliefs, unwilling to entertain the possibility that they were part of a much larger, unknowable plan. "I'm not sure I can accept that," said Father Thomas, a prominent theologian who had been present at the conference. "The idea that we're not the final creation is too much to take. It contradicts everything I've believed about God and the purpose of humanity. It suggests that there's no divine plan, no meaning behind our existence." Father Thomas's words struck a chord with others in the room. Several religious scholars nodded in agreement, their faces drawn in thought. The conversation was no longer just about technology or philosophy, it had become a deep moral and spiritual debate. Elon could sense the growing divide. On one side, the advocates of science, technology, and progress, who were eager to explore new frontiers, to question the limits of what humanity could achieve. On the other side, those who clung to their traditional beliefs, unwilling to let go of the certainty that humanity was the ultimate creation. It was clear that this debate was not going to be resolved easily. The conflict had grown too large, too complex. And for the first time, Elon wondered if there would ever be a way to bridge the divide between these two opposing views. In the midst of the chaos, XAE-A12, in his quiet way, spoke up again. His voice was soft, but clear. "What if we don't need to choose?" he asked, his words simple but profound. "What if there's a way to see both sides? What if we don't need to fight about whether we're the end or just a part of something larger? Maybe we're both. Maybe the answer is that we're always in the process of becoming." It was a moment of stillness. The room fell silent once more, as everyone processed the weight of X's statement. It wasn't a solution to the debate. It didn't resolve the growing conflict between the two factions. But it offered a glimmer of hope, a possibility that there was another way, a middle ground between the extremes of science and spirituality, between knowledge and faith. As the tension in the room began to dissipate, Elon looked around at the faces of those who had been part of this heated conversation. He saw fear, confusion, and uncertainty. But he also saw something else, a flicker of curiosity, of openness to ideas that might challenge their understanding of the world. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of the discussion. Maybe it was only the beginning. The room remained quiet, each individual absorbed in their own thoughts, processing the words of XAE-A12. The debate had shifted from an intellectual discussion to something deeper, a spiritual and philosophical exploration that seemed to transcend all previous arguments. It was no longer just a matter of technology or religion, it was about the very essence of existence, the reason we were all here. Elon Musk stood near the window, staring out at the vast landscape beyond, his mind racing. X's simple words, "What if we don't need to choose?" had planted a seed in his mind, a seed that was now growing at an astonishing rate. Could there really be a way to reconcile science and faith? Could the two seemingly opposing forces coexist in a harmonious, mutually beneficial relationship? His thoughts drifted to the cosmos, the rockets, the stars, the infinite possibilities of space. As a technologist and innovator, he had spent his career reaching for the stars, pushing the boundaries of what humanity could achieve. But now, as the debate unfolded around him, he couldn't help but wonder if there was something beyond the tangible achievements of technology, something larger, something more mysterious that had yet to be understood. Do you think it's possible? Elon turned to Dr. Hart, who had been silently contemplating X's statement. She had a thoughtful look on her face, as though she was processing something profound. To reconcile science and faith? Dr. Hart mused. I think it's possible, but it's not going to be easy. For centuries, we've viewed them as opposing forces. Science explains the how, and religion explains the why. But what if there's more to it than that? What if they both hold pieces of the same puzzle, and we've just been too focused on the pieces that fit together neatly? Elon nodded slowly, appreciating her perspective. What if X's idea of becoming is part of that puzzle, he asked. What if it's not about finding one definitive answer, but about understanding that we are always in a state of evolution? That's what I've been doing with SpaceX and Tesla, pushing forward, always evolving, always questioning what's next. Perhaps, Dr. Hart said with a slight smile. The key is to stop thinking of science and religion as two separate entities. Perhaps they're both part of a larger truth, one that we haven't fully discovered yet. Elon found himself intrigued by this new line of thought. As much as he was known for his rationality, there was something about this conversation that felt profoundly human, something that resonated with him on a deeper level. His mind had always been drawn to questions about the future, about space, about the unknown. But XAE-A12 had shown him that the unknown wasn't just a physical realm, it was also a mental and spiritual one. The group was starting to engage more thoughtfully now, and the tone of the conversation was shifting. What had begun as a confrontation over beliefs was now evolving into a collaborative search for deeper meaning. People who had been quick to dismiss X's ideas were now leaning in, intrigued by the potential of what he had suggested. Father Thomas, who had been largely silent since his earlier outburst, spoke up now, his voice quieter but with a newfound openness. Perhaps the question isn't whether science or faith is more important, he said, but whether we can find a way to integrate both. Maybe the future of humanity isn't about choosing one path over the other, but about understanding how they can coexist, just as we coexist in this universe. Our existence might be a blend of science and something more, something we can't yet fully comprehend. The theologian's words seemed to resonate with the others in the room, especially those who had been grappling with the tension between faith and reason. XAE-A12, in his quiet way, had unknowingly planted a seed of unity. It wasn't about proving one viewpoint right or wrong, it was about finding a way to embrace the complexities of life and existence, including both the scientific and spiritual dimensions. I think that's the key, Elon said, now more certain of his thoughts. The future isn't about separating things into categories. We need to be open to a more holistic understanding of the world, one that recognizes the importance of both technology and spirituality. We're moving into a new era, an era where we might just find that the answers we seek lie somewhere in the intersection of these two realms. XAE-A12, who had been sitting quietly next to his father, suddenly stood up. With the innocence only a child could possess, he spoke in a voice that was pure and unassuming, but still held the weight of something profound. What if the truth isn't about finding the answer at all, he said. What if the truth is just about asking the right questions? There was a long pause as everyone absorbed his words. X's voice, simple and clear, seemed to encapsulate the essence of the entire conversation. The pursuit of knowledge, whether through science or faith, wasn't about arriving at some final, definitive answer. It was about the journey, the questions we ask along the way, the willingness to explore, and the openness to ideas that challenge our understanding of the world. For Elon, the implications of this statement were profound. It wasn't just about the next technological breakthrough, or the next step in human evolution, it was about the broader questions of existence. The questions that science could never fully answer, but that could be informed by a deeper, more holistic understanding. I think we're starting to understand something important here, Elon said slowly. The questions themselves are the journey. The answers may not come right away, and maybe they'll never come in a way that makes sense to us. But by asking, by exploring, we push forward, into the unknown, into new realms of understanding. The room fell silent again, but this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't the tense, uncomfortable silence of earlier. It was the kind of silence that came after a revelation, a collective realization that they were on the verge of something significant. And then, XAE812 spoke again, in his usual straightforward way. "We're all just trying to figure things out, aren't we?" Those simple words seemed to encapsulate the essence of what they had all been searching for, an acknowledgement of the uncertainty, the complexity, and the beauty of being human. They were all in this together, trying to navigate the vast unknown, with all its questions and mysteries. Elon smiled at his son, feeling a sense of gratitude. He had always known that X was a special child, but now, in this moment, he realized that his son had a wisdom beyond his years, a wisdom that could guide him on the next steps of his own journey. The path ahead wasn't clear, but it was more exciting than ever. The questions would continue to arise, and the answers would remain elusive. But one thing was certain, the search for understanding was far from over. The air in the room had shifted. There was an undeniable tension, an eagerness to explore what XAE812 had ignited with his simple words. Everyone was aware that they were standing on the precipice of something significant, but no one could quite grasp what that something was yet. As the evening wore on, the group became more animated. The debate about the intersections of science and religion had become a central topic, with each participant adding their own perspective. But the philosophical questions that XAE812 had brought up remained the focus. What if humanity wasn't the pinnacle of creation? What if we were merely one step in a larger, ongoing experiment? And if that were true, what did that say about our place in the universe? Elon paced slowly around the room, occasionally pausing to listen to one of the participants. He couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency building in him. Here, within these walls, something was unfolding that could change everything he thought he knew about the world. For years, he had focused on solving practical problems, reaching Mars, developing sustainable energy, improving technology for the future of humanity. But now, this was about something more abstract, something much deeper than he'd ever considered. He thought back to the early days of SpaceX, when it was still a fledgling company struggling to stay afloat. He had been driven by a singular goal, to ensure the survival of humanity by making life multiplanetary. But now, as the words of his son echoed in his mind, he realized that the question of humanity's future was far more complex than he had ever thought. Is this the future we're building? Elon muttered under his breath. He turned to the group, suddenly needing to ask. Are we merely creating a future that's a continuation of the past, or are we capable of something different? Something that transcends what we know? The room fell quiet as everyone considered the question. Dr. Hart, who had been particularly engaged throughout the discussion, spoke up first. I think the real question is whether we're asking the right questions at all. For centuries, humanity has been driven by the need to answer, what are we? But maybe that's not the question we need to answer right now. Maybe it's time to ask, what can we become? Her words resonated with Elon, though they left him with even more questions. What could humanity become? And how did XAE812's insights fit into that? Was there something inherent in the way the world had been designed, something beyond our understanding of science, technology, or even the concept of God, that had the potential to shape humanity's future? As the debate continued, Elon began to consider his son's question more deeply. What if the search for the truth wasn't about finding the final answer, but about the willingness to challenge what you thought you knew? XAE812 had shown him that life was not just a series of problems to be solved or equations to be balanced. It was about the journey, about discovering new ways of thinking, new ways of seeing the world and the universe. Elon had spent so much of his life focused on reaching Mars, but maybe the greater mission was not about reaching another planet. It was about understanding the cosmic questions that humanity had always asked. Elon, said Father Thomas, his voice quieter now but still firm. You've spoken often about the importance of expanding human civilization beyond Earth. But I think, if we're being honest, the bigger question isn't about where we go, but why we go there. Elon looked at Father Thomas, who had been a vocal critic throughout the conversation but now seemed to be contemplating something deeper. You think the why matters more than the how? Elon asked. Father Thomas nodded slowly. Yes, I do. Humanity's desire to explore, to understand, is a powerful thing. But if we don't understand the why, then all the hows in the world won't matter. We may colonize Mars, build cities on the moon, but if we don't have a greater understanding of our place in the cosmos, then we risk making the same mistakes we've made here on Earth. Elon felt a stir within himself, an unsettling realization that Father Thomas might be right. For all of his accomplishments in the realms of technology and space exploration, there was still a lingering question: why? Why did he push forward with such relentless determination? What was the deeper purpose behind it all? He looked over at his son, who had been sitting quietly, absorbing the discussion without speaking. XAE-A12 met his father's gaze, a glint of something deeper in his eyes. It was as if the boy, so young and innocent, already understood things that Elon had only begun to grapple with. I've been thinking, Elon said, his voice slow and deliberate. Maybe the truth is we're not meant to solve everything. Maybe the journey itself is the answer. The questions, those are the things that will drive us. They'll keep us moving forward. The room seemed to collectively breathe a sigh of agreement. Elon had spoken, and everyone knew that his words were not just those of a visionary entrepreneur. They were the words of someone coming to terms with something much larger than technology or space travel. He was beginning to see that the search for the truth, about the universe, about existence, about humanity, wasn't something that could be easily solved. But it was something that must be embraced, no matter how daunting. XAE-A12's eyes sparkled, as though he had known this all along. He stood up from his seat, walked over to his father, and placed a hand on his arm. You don't have to have all the answers, Dad, X said simply. Maybe the best way to find the truth is to let the questions guide you. Elon smiled softly, his heart swelling with pride. His son had a clarity that he himself had only just begun to tap into. It was a reminder that sometimes, the most profound insights came from the least expected places. And so, as the conversation continued into the night, Elon Musk felt something shift within him. He had started this journey seeking to change the future, to push humanity beyond its limits. But now, he realized that the true quest was far deeper, one that would require not just technological innovation, but a shift in consciousness. The future wasn't just about where humanity would go, but how it would think, how it would ask the right questions, and how it would come to understand its place in the universe. The path forward was unclear, but one thing was certain: the search for truth had only just begun. The room had grown quieter over the course of the night. What had started as an impassioned debate about technology, religion, and humanity's place in the universe had evolved into something more personal. Each person present seemed to be grappling with their own emotions, each person re-evaluating their beliefs, their purpose, their connection to the greater picture. For Elon Musk, the conversation had become an emotional roller coaster. He had always been driven by logic and the pursuit of the practical, whether it was building rockets or solving the world's energy crisis. But tonight, the questions posed by his son, XAE-A12, had shattered his sense of certainty. The boy, in his youthful innocence, had tapped into something profound. It was as though X had unlocked a deeper layer of understanding, a layer that Elon had spent his entire life avoiding. And now, sitting at the heart of this intense philosophical conversation, Elon felt exposed. For the first time, he wasn't just thinking about the next technological breakthrough, he was thinking about something much more existential. The room was filled with murmurs, as the conversation now delved into the very essence of existence. It wasn't just about artificial intelligence, Mars colonization, or sustainable energy anymore. It was about the nature of creation itself. Could a machine truly possess consciousness? Could humanity ever transcend its own limitations? And, perhaps most importantly, did a higher power, a god, a creator, have a place in this rapidly advancing world? Father Thomas leaned forward, his voice soft but steady. Elon, you've spent your life questioning the boundaries of what's possible. But tonight, it feels like the question is not just what's possible, but what's meaningful. Are we losing sight of what really matters as we rush to build a future we don't fully understand? Elon's gaze shifted to his son, who had been eerily quiet throughout most of the evening. XAE-A12 had said little since the initial comment that sparked the entire debate. But as his father looked at him, he saw a child not lost in the chaos of the world's grandest questions but, instead, a boy who seemed to already understand more than his years suggested. A boy who had opened a door to something larger than science, something larger than technology. Suddenly, XAE-A12 stood up from his seat. He walked to the center of the room, his small frame commanding attention. There was a quiet intensity in the way he moved, a confidence that was almost unsettling. Everyone, X said, his voice calm but piercing, we keep talking about the future, about creating something new. But what if we're missing the point? Maybe it's not about what we create next. Maybe it's about what we are, what we already have inside us. The world is trying to build a new reality, but we're still trying to figure out who we are in the one we've been given. His words, simple and profound, sent a wave of stillness over the room. For a moment, no one spoke. No one moved. There was a weight to his statement that hung in the air like a dense fog. The room had shifted. What had started as a search for external truths was now being questioned from within. Elon felt a lump form in his throat. It was one of those rare moments in life when everything you thought you knew suddenly feels insignificant in the face of a deeper understanding. XAE-A12's words were a revelation, a reminder that the questions we seek to answer may not be the ones that matter most. A quiet tear slid down Elon's cheek, unbidden. It was a tear not of sadness but of realization. He had spent so much of his life chasing after goals. Missions to save humanity, to push technology to its limits, to redefine what was possible. But now, in the quiet presence of his son, he understood that the most important questions weren't the ones written on a whiteboard or drawn on a blueprint. The most important questions were the ones that lived in the heart. XAE-A12 continued, his words now more deliberate. What if the real breakthrough isn't about going to Mars or creating artificial intelligence that thinks like us? What if it's about understanding our connection to the universe, to each other, to everything that exists? What if the real breakthrough is realizing we're all part of something bigger, something we can't even begin to comprehend? The room remained silent. Everyone was processing what X had just said. And in that silence, Elon felt a flood of emotions wash over him, fear, confusion, awe, and a profound sense of peace. For years, he had been driven by the desire to solve problems, to build a future that was more sustainable, more technologically advanced. But now, for the first time, he was questioning whether that was enough. Was the future we were building truly the right future? Or had we, in our rush to create, lost sight of what truly mattered? Father Thomas, who had been an outspoken critic throughout the evening, now looked at XAE-A12 with a newfound respect. "You're right," he said quietly. "We've been so focused on the how that we forgot to ask the why. Perhaps that's the missing piece." A sense of understanding spread through the group. What had seemed like an impossible debate about technology and faith now seemed to be converging towards something greater, a shared understanding that transcended individual beliefs and goals. It was as though XAE-A12 had unlocked the door to a new kind of dialogue, one that didn't focus on what could be built but on what already existed within each of them. Elon looked at his son with a deep sense of gratitude and love. X had opened his eyes to a truth that was always there, hidden beneath the surface. It wasn't just about Mars or electric cars or the future of AI. It was about the fundamental question of what it meant to be human, to be alive in a universe that was vast, mysterious, and awe-inspiring. And for the first time in his life, Elon Musk realized that the answers he had been seeking weren't necessarily found in the stars or in the next great invention. They were found in the connections between people, in the shared humanity that united them all, and in the deep, unspoken truths that lay beneath the surface of their everyday lives. The conversation would continue, but for now, there was a moment of clarity, of peace. The emotional climax had arrived. And with it, a new understanding of the world, and of themselves. The silence that had blanketed the room was slowly being replaced by a gentle hum of conversation. But unlike earlier, this was not the heated, passionate debate of minutes ago. No, this was quieter, introspective. People were no longer fighting for their own viewpoints or dismissing others outright. There was a shift in the energy of the room, as if the words of XAE-A12 had triggered a moment of collective realization, a brief but powerful insight into something larger than themselves. Elon Musk sat back in his chair, his fingers resting lightly on the edge of the table. He looked over at X, who had returned to his seat, still lost in thought, his wide, curious eyes scanning the faces around him. For a moment, Elon saw a child who had been given the space to express something deep, something that not only challenged the room but was challenging him personally as well. It wasn't just the brilliance of his son's insights, it was the clarity, the simple profundity of them. X had spoken about humanity's connection to the universe, to each other, to the greater unknown, but in doing so, he had also inspired hope, a hope that had been all but lost in the whirlwind of technological ambition. Father Thomas, who had earlier been one of the most vocal skeptics, now leaned forward with an expression of quiet contemplation. "You know," he began, his voice soft, "for years I've preached about the need for faith, for something beyond ourselves. And yet, in all this talk of technology, it's easy to forget that hope is not a commodity we can create or engineer. It's something we have to find, deep within. Perhaps, Elon, we've been too focused on building the future and not enough on preserving what makes us human." Elon felt a lump form in his throat. There was an unexpected weight to Father Thomas's words, and for the first time, Elon began to understand. This wasn't just about creating sustainable futures or colonizing other planets. It was about reconnecting with the core of who they were, about understanding that no matter how much technology advanced, there would always be something beyond that, something intangible and deeply human. XAE-A12's words had opened a doorway to this realization. The boy's quiet wisdom had become a mirror for everyone in the room, reflecting not just their ideas about science or technology but their ideas about existence, about humanity's place in the grand scheme of things. "Hope," Elon murmured to himself, "that's what we've been missing." A few moments passed before anyone spoke again, but when they did, it was as if the tension had dissipated. People weren't talking past each other anymore, they were talking to each other. They were listening. Dr. Roberts, a renowned scientist and AI researcher, cleared his throat and raised his hand. "Elon, I have to admit, I came into this room thinking about how to push the boundaries of AI, how to build something that could transcend human limitations. But now, I'm wondering if we've been missing something. Is it possible that our greatest breakthroughs aren't technological, but emotional and philosophical? Can we combine technology with compassion, with meaning, with a deeper understanding of ourselves?" Elon nodded slowly, his mind whirring. "Maybe that's the next frontier," he said softly. "Maybe it's not just about what we build, but how we build it. Maybe the real breakthrough is in the balance between what we create and how we connect with it. How we connect with each other. What we learn from it." The room fell silent again, but this time, it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was one of reflection, of shared realization. Everyone in the room had just witnessed a shift in thinking. A shift from the external to the internal, from the pursuit of knowledge and advancement to the acknowledgement of something greater, something more profound. Elon's thoughts drifted back to his son, sitting across the room. X had sparked this shift, not just by his words, but by his sheer presence. Elon couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and pride in the child before him. This was a boy who had given them all something to think about, a boy who had reminded them that perhaps the answers they sought lay not just in the stars or in machines, but in the hearts and minds of those around them. It was then that Elon realized the full weight of what X had said earlier. The real breakthrough isn't about going to Mars or creating artificial intelligence that thinks like us, X had claimed. It's about understanding our connection to the universe, to each other, to everything that exists. Those words, simple as they were, held the key to something Elon had been missing in his pursuit of progress. It wasn't just about getting to Mars, it was about the journey to understanding the true nature of existence, about finding a deeper connection to the cosmos and to each other. As the conversation continued, Elon found himself looking at the world differently. He had always believed that technology could solve everything, that the future would be a utopia where humanity was no longer limited by the constraints of Earth. But now, he saw that the future could only be truly meaningful if it was shaped by more than just technology. It needed to be shaped by understanding, by compassion, by a shared belief in something greater than oneself. For the first time in a long time, Elon felt hope, not the kind of hope driven by grand visions of technological achievement, but the kind of hope that emerged from understanding, from connection, from the realization that even in the face of the unknown, humanity had the power to shape its own destiny. And as the night stretched on, the conversation turned toward a new question. It wasn't about what they could build or how they could change the world. It was about what they could learn from each other and from the universe around them. It was about finding hope, not in technology, but in the very act of questioning, of seeking, and of connecting with something greater than themselves. In that moment, Elon Musk understood that true inspiration didn't come from groundbreaking technology. It came from the people you shared your life with, from the ideas that challenged your assumptions, and from the hope that, no matter how uncertain the future might seem, humanity would always find a way forward, together. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes after a conversation has stretched the boundaries of what one thought was possible. They had explored the furthest reaches of thought, from humanity's purpose in the universe to the nature of existence itself. There were no easy answers, only more questions, questions that gnawed at them, making it impossible to ignore their underlying complexities. Elon sat at the head of the table, his elbows resting on the surface, his fingers intertwined. His gaze moved over the faces around him, scientists, philosophers, thinkers, all of them deep in thought. In the far corner of the room, XAE-A12 sat quietly, looking as though he were waiting for the next wave of realization to break over them. His expression was calm, but his eyes, those wide and curious eyes, seemed to be holding a vast amount of knowledge that none of them could quite grasp. Elon had to admit that the words his son had spoken earlier still lingered in his mind. They haunted him, challenging everything he had believed in so far. The idea that humanity might not be the final creation, that they were merely part of an experiment or a much larger design, it was a concept so vast that it made his mind ache. Yet, it also sparked something in him, something that felt like the beginning of a new chapter in the journey of human understanding. Dr. Roberts, who had been particularly vocal about the potential for AI to evolve into something greater than humanity, leaned forward. If we continue down the path we're on, with all this technology, this artificial intelligence, could we one day create something greater than ourselves? Is that what X meant when he spoke about us not being the final creation? Elon glanced at X, who sat motionless, his hands folded in his lap. It was as though he was listening to the question without rushing to answer it. The boy's silence only deepened the gravity of the discussion. I think he was asking us to consider a deeper possibility, Elon said softly, his voice carrying a trace of uncertainty. What if we're not the ultimate creation? What if everything we've achieved, everything we know, has merely been a stepping stone for something greater? Father Thomas, who had been listening intently, nodded in agreement. It's the age-old question, isn't it? If there is a creator, if there is a higher power, then why would that power stop at us? Could we be part of a much larger design? Could we be an experiment in an ongoing process that extends far beyond the confines of our understanding? The conversation grew heavier as they all began to digest the weight of Father Thomas's words. There was a sense of quiet reverence in the room, as if everyone knew they were standing on the edge of something monumental. The boundaries between science, religion, and philosophy had blurred, and the lines between the known and the unknown had begun to fade away. Dr. Roberts pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose, a habit that Elon had noticed during every one of their previous discussions. "You know," he began, his voice thoughtful, "if we really entertain the idea that we're part of something bigger, we're forced to rethink the way we view our entire existence. Everything we've built, everything we've learned, it might not be for us at all. It could be part of a cycle, a larger process that we don't even fully comprehend." Elon was struck by the implication. All of his work with SpaceX, with Tesla, with Neuralink, had it all just been steps towards something even greater? Were they, in some strange way, setting the stage for the next phase of human evolution, or perhaps, something even beyond that? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. It would mean that everything they had accomplished, everything they hoped to achieve, was not necessarily for the benefit of humanity alone. It might be part of a much grander cosmic design, something that transcended human understanding. It was an uncomfortable thought, but it also filled Elon with a strange sense of awe. XAE-812's voice broke the silence. His words were quiet but clear, carrying an almost otherworldly wisdom. Maybe we're not meant to understand it all right now. Maybe we're just meant to play our part. Maybe the final answer is something none of us can grasp, at least not yet. The room fell into a deep silence once more, as X's words hung in the air. His perspective was different from anything they had considered, and yet, in his simplicity, there was an undeniable truth. Perhaps the answer wasn't in the question at all, but in the acceptance that they could never fully understand the universe's grand design. Father Thomas exhaled deeply. "It seems to me that we spend so much time trying to fit God or creation into our own understanding, our own limited perspective. But what if, just as X suggested, the answer lies not in trying to understand the grand design, but in playing our role within it? What if it's about the journey, not the destination?" Elon couldn't help but smile at the idea. It was a humbling thought, one that made him reconsider everything he had been pushing for. All of his ambitions for the future, his dreams of colonizing Mars, of advancing human technology, had always been about taking control, about reaching for the stars and beyond. But now, after everything that had been said, he found himself wondering if it was all just part of a much larger cosmic dance. What if the real question, Elon said, his voice gaining strength as he spoke, is not what we can achieve, but how we can contribute. How we can be part of this greater process without trying to force it to fit our understanding. The room was still. For a moment, it felt as though the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting for them to grasp the full meaning of what had just been said. And then, slowly, as if the weight of the conversation had just settled in, Dr. Roberts nodded. "Maybe that's the final theory. Maybe it's not about what we know, but about what we're willing to learn. It's about humility. About acknowledging that we're part of something much greater than ourselves, and that our role is to be open to the mysteries of the universe, rather than trying to control them." Elon looked at his son once more, his heart swelling with pride. X's quiet wisdom had sparked a realization in him, and now, with the conversation winding down, he felt as though a new chapter had just begun, not just in the world of science and technology, but in his own life. As the room began to fill with quiet conversations once again, Elon Musk knew that the journey ahead would be different from anything he had ever imagined. It wasn't just about achieving greatness, it was about understanding, about connection, and about humility in the face of the unknown. And as the night drew to a close, Elon Musk found himself more inspired than ever before, not by the technologies he had built, but by the realization that the greatest breakthrough of all might just be the understanding of humanity's place in the grand design of the universe. The days following the meeting were a blur. Elon Musk found himself replaying the conversations in his mind, the intense discussions, the thoughts his son had introduced, and the philosophical ideas that now seemed to color his every waking moment. It was as though something had shifted within him, a subtle but profound transformation. He had spent so much of his life focused on technological advancement, pushing the boundaries of what was possible, but now there was a growing awareness that perhaps the most important frontier wasn't one that could be measured in miles or data points. Perhaps the true challenge lay in the questions that couldn't be answered by science alone. Sitting in his office late one evening, Elon stared out of the window, looking at the endless expanse of stars that twinkled in the sky. Space, the very thing he had dedicated his life to exploring, now seemed like a vast, unknowable mystery, filled with possibilities that stretched far beyond anything he could fathom. He had always believed that humanity was on the brink of something extraordinary, but now, after everything he had heard and learned from X, he was starting to see that perhaps the greatest breakthroughs were not just technological. They were spiritual, philosophical, and deeply human. As he sat in reflection, he thought about the words his son had spoken, the notion that humanity might not be the final creation. The idea that there could be a larger force at work, something beyond their comprehension. It was a thought that made Elon both uncomfortable and excited. It stirred something deep within him, something that called him to look beyond the immediate goals he had set for himself and consider what it all meant on a larger scale. It was an uncomfortable realization. Elon had always prided himself on being a man of reason, driven by logic and scientific discovery. But now, he was forced to confront the fact that there were aspects of existence that couldn't be fully explained by technology alone. He wasn't sure what that meant for his work, for his companies, or for his vision of the future. But one thing was clear, his view of the world was changing. His thoughts turned back to the people in the room, the scientists, philosophers, and theologians. The conversations they had engaged in had been deeply enriching, but also deeply unsettling. They had questioned the very nature of existence, the purpose of humanity, and the role of technology in shaping the future. They had asked questions that, in some ways, could never be answered. And that realization, in itself, was both liberating and daunting. Elon sighed and leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. He had always been driven by the idea of solving problems, of finding answers to the world's most pressing questions. But what if the greatest challenge wasn't to solve everything, but to accept that there were some things that couldn't be solved? What if the journey was more important than the destination? He thought about his son, XAE-A12. The boy had been the catalyst for all of this. His seemingly simple question about creation had sparked a conversation that had turned everything upside down. X had an innocence and purity about him that was almost otherworldly, yet his words carried a wisdom that even the most brilliant minds in the room couldn't easily dismiss. It was as though he was tapped into something beyond the human experience, a perspective that transcended age, culture, and knowledge. Elon couldn't help but marvel at how much his son had taught him in such a short time. X hadn't been trying to prove anything. He hadn't been trying to challenge anyone's beliefs. He had simply asked a question that had shaken the foundations of everything Elon and the others thought they knew. His mind wandered to the conversations he had had with his colleagues after the meeting. They, too, had been affected by what X had said. Some were excited by the possibilities it suggested, while others were unsettled by the implications. But one thing was clear. No one left that room unchanged. Everyone had been forced to reconsider their own beliefs and assumptions about the world. And in that moment, Elon realized that perhaps this was the true gift X had given him, not just a new way of thinking about technology, but a new way of thinking about the world. It wasn't about control, about pushing forward with relentless ambition. It was about curiosity, humility, and a willingness to question everything they thought they knew. As the night deepened and the stars continued to shimmer above, Elon felt a sense of peace settle over him. The future was uncertain, and the questions were vast, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to embrace the unknown. He didn't have all the answers, and maybe he never would. But that was okay. The journey, with all its twists and turns, was where the true discoveries lay. And then, as if to underscore that thought, XAE-A12's voice broke through the silence of Elon's reflection. The boy had been standing in the doorway for some time, watching his father in quiet contemplation. "You're thinking about it, aren't you?" X asked, his voice gentle but filled with an understanding that seemed far beyond his years. Elon looked up, his expression softening. I'm trying to make sense of everything that was said. There's so much more to this than I ever realized. X smiled, a knowing smile that made Elon feel like his son was, in some strange way, guiding him towards something important. You don't have to make sense of it all, Dad, X said. Sometimes, the answers are found not in figuring everything out, but in accepting that we're part of something bigger than ourselves. Elon nodded slowly, a deep sense of gratitude filling his chest. You're right. Maybe it's about letting go of the need for control and just embracing the unknown. X's eyes sparkled with an almost playful wisdom. Exactly. The universe isn't a puzzle to be solved. It's an adventure to be lived. Elon chuckled softly, a weight lifting from his shoulders. He had spent so much of his life trying to control the future, but now, he realized that the future was something far grander than anything he could shape on his own. It was a mystery to be explored, a story that was still unfolding, and all he had to do was be open to it. Thanks, kid, Elon said, his voice filled with affection and newfound clarity. You've given me a lot to think about. X nodded, his eyes shining with that same knowing glint. That's what I'm here for. As Elon turned his gaze back to the stars, he felt a sense of peace settle in his heart. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was also full of potential. And with that thought, he felt ready to step into whatever came next, not with all the answers, but with an open mind and a heart full of curiosity. The days following the intense discussions in the conference room felt like a dream. Elon Musk couldn't quite shake the weight of the questions that had been raised, nor the quiet urgency to find answers that didn't just stem from technology or science. There was something more, something deeper, that had been awakened in him, and he wasn't sure how to process it all. His son, XAEA-12, had once again stirred the pot of the future, and it wasn't just about the next SpaceX launch or the newest AI advancement, it was about something that bridged the gaps between science, religion, and the very essence of existence itself. Sitting in his office at Tesla, looking out over the city, Elon found his thoughts drifting toward the future. The world was evolving at breakneck speed, with breakthroughs coming one after another. But what about the future of humanity itself? What was the cost of advancing technology so quickly? What was the cost of leaving behind the ancient questions, the ones that made people pause and reflect on their existence, about life, creation, and the mysteries of the universe? As much as Elon had built companies and revolutionized industries, there was one truth that had become undeniable: answers were hard to come by. And even if they were found, there was a humbling realization that perhaps there were some questions humans were simply not meant to answer in their lifetimes. He thought about the meeting, about the discussion surrounding his son's unassuming yet profound question: what if we aren't the final creation? That had shaken the very core of the room. It was a question that led to the notion of something greater, something cosmic, larger than humanity could ever understand. The idea that the universe might be full of intelligent life, or perhaps governed by an intelligence far beyond human comprehension, was both terrifying and exhilarating. Elon's mind raced with possibilities. Could there be a godlike being beyond the realm of human understanding? Could life, as he and everyone on Earth knew it, be part of a much bigger experiment or pattern? Were they merely a cog in a vast cosmic machine? Or perhaps the essence of the universe was something even more intangible, something beyond physical existence itself? His thoughts were interrupted by the soft sound of footsteps. It was Kimball, his brother, who had entered the room quietly. Kimball had always been the more reflective one, the one to pull Elon out of his endless spiral of thoughts and back into the present moment. "You've been at it for hours, haven't you?" Kimball asked, leaning against the doorframe, a concerned look on his face. Elon looked up, blinking as though returning from a faraway place. "Yeah. I guess I'm trying to make sense of all of this." Kimball smiled knowingly and walked into the room. "You don't need to make sense of it all. Sometimes, the answers just come to you when you stop trying so hard." Elon exhaled sharply, letting his shoulders relax. "I don't know. I feel like I'm standing on the edge of something big, but I don't know what it is." And X. I think he's onto something I'm just starting to understand. This whole conversation about technology, religion, and creation, it's bigger than anything I've ever dealt with. Kimball took a seat across from Elon, his expression thoughtful. You've always been good at building things, Elon. But maybe the thing you're supposed to build now isn't a rocket or an electric car. Maybe it's something inside you. Maybe it's a way of understanding the world, and understanding your place in it. Elon chuckled softly. I've never been great at that. I'm all about moving forward, about the next challenge, the next leap forward. It's hard for me to slow down, to reflect. Kimball nodded. I know. But maybe slowing down and just being in the moment is the key to moving forward, too. It's like you're so focused on the next big thing, but you've got to let the bigger questions simmer. You don't have to have all the answers. Sometimes it's enough to sit with the uncertainty. The room grew quiet for a moment, the only sound the hum of the city in the distance. Elon's mind wandered back to the question his son had posed and the conversations that followed. The future of humanity. Technology and its role in shaping the next phase of life on Earth. The possibility that humanity might not be the final product of creation. He felt a strange pull toward those thoughts, as if they were guiding him toward something. But where? Elon's phone buzzed on the desk, breaking the silence. He glanced down at it and saw a message from Grimes, his partner. She'd been an anchor for him during this whirlwind of ideas and had always offered him a balance of grounded reality and spiritual insight. The message was simple: don't forget, we're all still learning. Don't rush it. Elon couldn't help but smile. She had a way of cutting through the noise, grounding him when he needed it most. You're right, he said, looking up at Kimball. I need to stop trying to figure it all out. Maybe I'm trying to control too much, trying to make it all fit into a neat little box. The truth is, I don't know where this is all going. But maybe that's okay. Kimball smiled, standing up to leave. You've always said that you can't plan for everything. You build the foundations, and then you let the rest unfold. As Kimball left the room, Elon turned his attention back to the stars outside. The sky, vast and endless, seemed to echo the feelings that had been growing inside him. The future wasn't something to be controlled or conquered. It was something to be discovered, something to be experienced. The questions X had sparked weren't problems to be solved. They were invitations, challenges to look beyond the tangible and embrace the unknown. It wasn't just about technology or space exploration. It was about what came next for humanity. It was about what it meant to be alive, to be part of something much larger than oneself. With that realization, Elon felt a deep sense of peace. The journey he was on was far from over. There were still questions to ask, still mysteries to explore. But the most important thing was to be open to the answers that would come, and to accept that some things were beyond understanding. For the first time in a long time, Elon allowed himself to stop searching for answers. He simply let himself wonder. Elon Musk stood at the edge of the launch platform at SpaceX, the roar of ocean wind whipping through the air as the sun dipped below the horizon. The sky bled orange and violet, a reminder of how small Earth was in the cosmic scale. Behind him, preparations for the next Mars mission continued, teams moving like clockwork, machinery humming with focused precision. But Elon wasn't looking at the rocket. His eyes were fixed on the sky. And his thoughts were somewhere far beyond it. So much had changed. Not just in his companies or in the future of technology, but inside him. And it all started with one simple question from his son. What if we aren't the final creation? That sentence, casually spoken, had unlocked a door in his mind, and in the minds of many others. Philosophers, scientists, theologians, engineers, everyone who had been in that room had gone back to their lives changed. Quietly, subtly, but irreversibly. They were different now, carrying new questions with them. The kind that couldn't be unasked. Elon turned when he heard soft footsteps behind him. It was XAEA-12, his son, calm, observant, always watching the world like he was trying to see through it. "You're thinking about it again, aren't you?" X said, with a grin too knowing for a boy his age. "I guess I haven't stopped," Elon replied, smiling back. "Everything I thought I knew. I'm looking at it differently now." X walked up beside him and stared out at the sky. "That's good. It means you're still learning." That one sentence struck Elon harder than he expected. Not long ago, he would have dismissed such a comment, chalked it up to a child mimicking adult wisdom. But not now. Not after everything. Now, X's words felt like keys. Elon had spent decades building the future. Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, Starlink. They were all extensions of the same vision: humanity must survive, must evolve, must reach beyond itself. But for the first time, he realized he had rarely stopped to ask why. Not the why of avoiding extinction. The deeper why. Why humanity? Why consciousness? Why existence? And now, he wasn't sure if those questions had answers. He wasn't sure if they even needed answers. "I've been thinking about shutting off from the spotlight for a while," Elon said. "Not stepping back completely. But focusing more inward. Creating space for questions like these." X didn't look surprised. "Maybe that's where you find your next launch." "Not up there." He pointed to the rocket. "But in here." He placed a hand over his chest. Elon let out a quiet laugh, almost in disbelief at the clarity of his son's insight. "You're right. Again." They stood in silence for a while, father and son, watching as the first stars emerged in the darkening sky. The air was cooler now, the wind gentler, as if the planet itself was preparing for the next chapter. Behind them, the future hummed, machines being programmed, data being analyzed, technology preparing to pierce the edge of space. But within Elon, a different kind of future was beginning. Not a rocket. Not a neural implant. Something slower. Something more human. In the weeks that followed the conference, Elon had begun gathering some of the people from that room again, not for another debate, but for something different. A collaboration. A fusion of perspectives. The plan was not to build a new device or write a new code, but to create a space, both physical and intellectual, where people could come together to explore the fundamental questions that crossed disciplines. What is consciousness? What is purpose? Could technology and spiritual inquiry coexist instead of clash? He called it the Ether Project. It would bring together theologians, researchers, philosophers, artists, and astronauts. Not to debate, but to imagine. To co-create. Not the next invention, but the next evolution of thought. And at the center of that idea was the belief that no one person, no one field, could answer the questions that X had raised alone. "We need everyone," Elon had said during the first planning meeting. "The people who believe in God. The ones who believe in data. And especially the ones who aren't sure what they believe at all." This wasn't about control. It wasn't about power. It was about meaning. It was about wonder. And the world was ready for it. The media had picked up on the shift, speculating that Musk had gone spiritual, or perhaps simply lost focus. But those who had attended the meeting knew better. They knew it wasn't a shift away from the future, it was a deeper step into it. A recognition that rockets and algorithms were not enough. That humanity's next leap forward wouldn't come from hardware, but from a new framework of thought. As for XAEA-12, he remained the quiet center of it all. Not a prophet. Not a genius. Just a boy who saw things differently. And maybe that was enough. Because sometimes the greatest revolutions don't come from answers. They come from the courage to ask the right question. And for Elon Musk, the journey was no longer just about reaching Mars. It was about reaching inward. And discovering what it really meant to be human. The conference was long over. The media frenzy had faded. The trending hashtags had cooled. But for the people who had been there, who had sat in that room when a child shattered the silence with a question too big for most adults to answer, nothing was ever quite the same again. And for Elon Musk, it had been transformative. He wasn't the same man he was before his son asked that question. The man who had once defined progress by launch velocity and gigafactory output now spoke more quietly, listened more carefully, and thought longer before answering. He hadn't abandoned science. He hadn't found religion in the traditional sense. But he had found reverence. Not for a god with a name. But for the mystery itself. The Ether project was no longer just an idea, it was a living, breathing movement. It spanned continents and disciplines. Physicists and poets, monks and coders, skeptics and seekers gathered under its ethos, to explore creation not just as something external, but internal. The questions weren't about solving the universe anymore. They were about aligning with it. Elon had restructured parts of his life to make space for these deeper inquiries. He still ran Tesla. Still oversaw SpaceX launches. But he had delegated more. He carved out time, not for productivity hacks, but for reflection. For thinking deeply about the fusion of consciousness and code, of spirit and circuitry. And XAE-812. He had become a quiet icon. Not a celebrity. Not a guru. Just a reminder. A reminder that the most powerful breakthroughs sometimes come not from answers, but from the courage to ask a question no one else is asking. When Elon looked back on his legacy now, he didn't just see rockets or robots. He saw conversations. Ideas planted like seeds, growing across disciplines, across time. Not all of them would bear fruit in his lifetime. But that wasn't the point. He had once believed that the most important thing he could leave behind was a way off this planet. Now he believed it might be something else entirely. A shift in human thought. A reminder that technology without wisdom is noise. And that the quest for knowledge must always include the search for meaning. In a quiet moment, years later, Elon and X sat together watching a SpaceX launch on a private feed from their ranch in Texas. The rocket soared, fire beneath it, destiny ahead. But the moment wasn't about the rocket. It was about what X asked after. "Dad, do you think we'll ever meet the one who made us?" Elon looked at his son. Older now. Wiser. But still carrying that same curiosity. And for the first time in his life, Elon didn't try to answer. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He just said, "I think, we're meant to keep looking." This story isn't about Elon Musk. It isn't about his son. It isn't even about God. It's about us. About the questions that still haunt our most advanced minds. About the mystery that refuses to die, even in the age of AI. About the voice in every human heart that whispers, "There's more. Keep searching." And maybe that's the point. Maybe the real purpose of our existence isn't to find the ultimate answer. But to never stop asking the ultimate question. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?